My CO smirked. Layla, we're downsizing. Clear your desk by tomorrow. I nodded. Of course. He didn't know I already had an offer from his biggest rival. By Monday, his smile vanished as he walked into a meeting and saw me sitting at the head of the table. Layla, we're downsizing. Clear your desk by tomorrow. Silence. The words lingered in the air, heavier than the polished mahogany desk between us. I kept my face unreadable even though my heart pounded in my chest. I had spent 6 years of my life saving this company, turning Damien Caldwell's failures into successes, fighting his battles, fixing his messes. No. He was tossing me aside like I was nothing. Not every battle is fought with fists. Some are won with strategy, patience, and knowing when to make your move. If you love stories of resilience, ambition, and power shifts, make sure to subscribe. Together, we explore the moments that define us. Now let's dive in. Damien's fingers tapped rhythmically against his luxury watch, his expression eerily calm, as if this was just another routine decision. As if I wasn't the reason Caldwell Corporation was standing today. I swallowed the bitter taste of betrayal. You're downsizing? My voice came out steady, controlled. He nodded, completely unbothered. It's a tough market, Layla. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. I had been in the trenches when this company was barely keeping its head above water. I had spent countless nights strategizing, negotiating, pulling Caldwell Corporation out of the red. No, we weren't just surviving. We were thriving. And yet, I was the one being cut. My stomach twisted, but I refused to let him see it. I squared my shoulders. And my position? Damien sighed, leaning back in his chair, his smirk returning. That smirk. The one he always wore when he knew he was in control. I'm replacing you with Madeline Pierce. The name hit me like a slap. Madeline. His girlfriend. I should have known. The signs were all there. The longer lunch breaks, the unnecessary meetings, the way he started deferring my decisions to someone who had no experience in corporate strategy. Madeline had never earned this position. But she had the one thing I didn't, Damien's attention. I stood up slowly, adjusting my blazer. Controlled. Come. Damien was waiting for me to argue, to beg. That I smiled. Understood. For the first time in his pathetic life, Damien looked confused. No hard feelings? He asked, feigning concern. No hard feelings. After everything I had sacrificed for this place? After I had turned this company from a failing disaster into a market leader? I wanted to laugh, scream, throw the expensive paperweight on his desk straight through the glass walls. But I wouldn't, because Damien didn't deserve my anger. He deserved something much worse. I turned, walking out of his office, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. As I moved through the hallways of Caldwell Corporation, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made for this place. The late nights, the weekends lost, the relationships I let slip away. I had built teams from scratch, brokered record-breaking deals, saved this company when it was drowning. And this was my reward. A quiet, humiliating exit. As I passed by the glass-walled conference rooms, employees cast quick, uncertain glances at me. Some looked down at their desks. Others gave me sympathetic nods. They had heard. They knew. But none of them spoke up. Because this was Damien Caldwell's empire. And I had just been erased. I reached my office, the space I had practically lived in for years. Everything was still in place. The files I had painstakingly organized, the business plans I had mapped out, the whiteboard filled with strategies that had saved this company. I moved toward my desk, but then I saw it. An email notification on my screen. The subject line? Leadership announcement. New CSO appointment. My breath stilled. They didn't even wait. I clicked it open, scanning the text, my eyes burning with rage. Effective immediately, Madeline Pierce has been appointed as Chief Strategy Officer. We are confident that her vision and leadership will continue to drive Caldwell Corporation forward. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Madeline had never led anything in her life. She had never made a tough business decision, never built a strategy, never fought for a company's survival. But none of that mattered. Because Damien didn't value competence. He valued control. And I had never been controllable. A soft knock on the door made me look up. Jonathan Hale. The head of finance. One of the few people at Caldwell Corporation I actually respected. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "This company won't survive without you," he said, his voice low. I forced a small, bitter smile. "I know." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You built this place, Layla. You think Damien doesn't know that? He's making a mistake." I shook my head. Damien knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't care about what was best for the company. He cared about control. "I tried to talk to him," Jonathan continued. "Tried to make him see reason." I let out a humorless laugh. "And how did that go?" Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's going to regret this." I nodded, but I already knew. Because this company's downfall had already begun. I turned back to my desk. The gold nameplate still read, "Layla Warren, Chief Strategy Officer." Tomorrow it would say, "Madeline Pierce, Damien's plaything." I clenched my jaw, inhaling sharply. Oh, this wouldn't be my ending. This wouldn't be my story. I had been the backbone of this company. The one who held it together, fixed its failures, made it a leader in the market. Damien thought I was replaceable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Because without me, Caldwell Corporation would burn. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger to watch it happen. I stepped out of the Caldwell Corporation building, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, relief, anything. But right now there was only a hollow space inside my chest, one I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, my grip tightening around the handle of the small box carrying the last remnants of my career. 6 years of my life. Reduced to a few office supplies and a framed certificate. How poetic. The streets were unusually quiet, the city lights flickering against the dark sky. I needed a destination, somewhere to sit, to process, to think. But where? Not home. That would make it feel too real. Not a friend's place. I wasn't ready for sympathy. And then, as if on instinct, my feet started moving, carrying me down the familiar sidewalks of downtown. I hadn't been walking for more than 5 minutes when a voice called out from behind me. "Layla." I froze, my jaw clenching before I even turned around. Madeline. Of course it had to be her. I turned slowly, masking the storm brewing inside me, only to find her standing there in a form-fitting trench coat, her perfectly styled hair swaying in the light breeze. She looked completely at ease, like a queen stepping out of her castle, while I stood there with a box full of my career's ashes. Her lips curled into a practiced, innocent smile. "I just wanted to check in on you." I arched a brow, forcing myself to remain calm. "Check in?" "Yes," she said sweetly, stepping closer. "I know how much this job meant to you." I nearly laughed. The audacity. She knew exactly what she was doing. I met her gaze, keeping my expression unreadable. "That's kind of you, Madeline." She tilted her head. "No hard feelings, right?" No hard feelings. I had rebuilt this company from the ground up. Sacrificed my personal life. Fought battles that weren't mine to fight. Only to be discarded for her. For someone who had never earned anything she had. I smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Of course not." Madeline studied me for a second, searching for cracks in my composure. When she found none, her eyes glinted with amusement. She thrived on the power shift. She wanted me to break. Too bad for her. I had already broken once. It wasn't happening again. "Good," she said, giving a small nod. "Then I guess I'll see you around." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away, my heart pounding with barely contained fury. Let her have this moment. As soon I would have mine. I found myself walking toward a small bookstore cafe, tucked into a quiet street corner. It was one of my favorite places. One I used to visit when I needed an escape. Back when Caldwell Corporation was still my second home, not the battlefield it had become. The bell chimed softly as I stepped inside, the scent of brewed coffee and aged paper wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. A few late-night customers sat tucked in corners, absorbed in their books. The world felt slower here, distant from the corporate chaos I had just left behind. I walked to the counter and ordered a black coffee, something strong enough to pull me out of my thoughts. As I waited, I noticed an old man sitting by the window, hunched over a newspaper. His hands were slightly shaking, his glasses perched at the edge of his nose as he underlined something with a pen. I don't know why, but he felt familiar. When the barista handed me my coffee, I found myself moving toward his table. Excuse me, I said, my voice softer than I expected. Do you mind if I sit here? The man looked up, his eyes sharp but kind. After a brief hesitation, he nodded. I sat down across from him, wrapping my fingers around the warmth of my cup. You look troubled, he said after a moment. I exhaled, letting out a short, humorless chuckle. It's been a long day. He gave a knowing nod, then slid the newspaper across the table. Ever read the business section? I glanced down. The headlines were about corporate takeovers, rising stocks, and CEO scandals. A world I had once thrived in. A world that had just spit me out. I admitted. Now I'm not so sure. The man studied me for a moment before setting his pen down. You remind me of my daughter. She worked herself to the bone for a company that never saw her worth. I looked up, something heavy settling in my chest. What happened to her? I asked. A small, sad smile touched his lips. She walked away. Started something of her own. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my cup. Walked away. The words settled in my mind, echoing in places I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge yet. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to fight to prove my worth to people who never valued me in the first place. Maybe it was time to build something of my own. I left the cafe feeling lighter, though the weight of betrayal still clung to me like a second skin. As I walked back toward my apartment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and hesitated. A message from Jonathan Hale. Jonathan, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. You didn't deserve this. I stared at the message for a long moment. Jonathan had always been one of the few good ones. He had seen what was coming. He had warned Damien. And Damien had ignored him. I typed out a response. Thanks, Jonathan. I'll be okay. I wasn't sure if that was true. But I would be. Eventually. As I slid my phone back into my pocket, I turned one last time toward the city skyline. Caldwell Corporation stood tall in the distance, a monument to everything I had built. But it wasn't mine anymore. Maybe that was a good thing. I stood at the edge of my apartment balcony, staring at the city skyline. Caldwell Corporation loomed in the distance, its glass windows reflecting the city lights like a fortress standing against the dark. It had been 3 days since I walked out of that building, and yet, it still felt like a phantom limb, something I could feel even though it was no longer mine. I should have been grieving. Instead, I was waiting for the first crack to appear. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that Caldwell Corporation wouldn't survive without me. Damien thought he had made a business decision when he replaced me with Madeline. He had, in reality, made a mistake that was about to cost him everything. A vibration from my phone pulled me out of my thoughts. I reached for it, expecting a message from Jonathan. But it wasn't from Jonathan. It was from an unknown number. Unknown. You're not the only one leaving. My pulse quickened. I typed back quickly. Who is this? The response came almost instantly. Unknown. Someone who believes in you. Before I could reply, another message appeared. Unknown. Check your email. I hesitated, but curiosity pushed me forward. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. My inbox was flooded with Caldwell Corporation internal resignations. My breath hitched. It wasn't one or two people. It was dozens. Finance, marketing, operations, even a few from the legal team. Half the people I had worked alongside for years were leaving. And suddenly I knew. Damien had thought he was getting rid of me. Instead, he had set off a mass exodus. I refreshed the screen, the number of resignation emails growing by the minute. The people leaving weren't just random employees. They were some of Caldwell Corp's top executives, the brains behind its success. The same people Damien had ignored. The same people he had undervalued. Well, they were walking away. And not just anywhere. They were walking straight to me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I hesitated for half a second before answering. Who is this? A deep voice responded. Richard Langley. I hear you've been busy. My fingers tightened around my phone. Titan Industries. Damien's biggest competitor. The same man who had tried to hire me months ago. No. He wanted to talk. How did you get my number? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Langley chuckled. People talk, Layla. And right now they're all talking about you. I said nothing. I wasn't about to play into whatever game he was setting up. You made an impression at Caldwell Corporation, Langley continued. And it seems you've left with more than just experience. People are following you, Layla. Important people. I didn't respond because he wasn't wrong. And we both knew what he was about to offer. You're a smart woman, Langley said. You know where this is headed. I want you at Titan Industries. Full executive power. Build something with us. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I had been loyal to Caldwell Corporation for 6 years. I had built everything. And Damien had thrown me away. No. He was about to watch me take everything he once had. I exhaled. I'm listening. By the time the call ended, the deal was set. I wasn't just joining Titan Industries. I was leading a new initiative. One that would specifically target Caldwell Corporation as market share. Damien had played me like a disposable piece on a chessboard. No. I was flipping the entire board. But before I could strike, I needed to understand what was left of Caldwell Corp. I reached for my phone and dialed Jonathan. He answered on the first ring. Tell me you've seen the resignations. I have, I said. And I need to know what else is happening. Jonathan sighed. Layla, it's worse than you think. Damien is losing his grip. Investors are panicking. Clients are questioning whether the company can hold up. And with all these resignations, it's turning into a disaster. I smiled. Good. Jonathan hesitated. Layla, what are you planning? I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't just about business. This was personal. And I wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I sat in the boardroom of Titan Industries, overlooking the city skyline. Across from me sat some of Caldwell Corp's former executives. People who had walked out after my firing. These weren't just employees. These were the architects of Caldwell Corp's success. No. They were mine. I leaned forward, hands clasped together. We're going to do this carefully. No mistakes. No rushed moves. The room was silent. Then one of the former marketing heads spoke. What's the plan? I looked around the table, meeting each of their gazes. Then I smiled. The plan is simple, I said. We dismantle Caldwell Corporation from the inside out. A silence settled over the boardroom. The kind that stretched, thick with expectation and the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. I leaned back in my chair, fingers pressed together, scanning the faces of the executives who had followed me from Caldwell Corporation to Titan Industries. Some were eager, their eyes burning with the same quiet vengeance that fueled me. Others looked wary, understanding the gravity of what we were about to do. I didn't blame them. We weren't just competing with Caldwell Corp. We were tearing it apart, piece by piece, client by client, dollar by dollar. And by the time we were done, Damien Caldwell wouldn't have a company left to run. I let the silence linger a second longer, then spoke. We start slow. We don't attack head-on. We let the cracks that are already forming do the work for us. The former head of finance, Malcolm Carter, frowned. We already know Caldwell Corporation is in free fall, but they're not dead yet. Damien is going to fight. I smiled. Of course he is. That's why we don't go for him directly. We go for the foundation. The clients, Jonathan said, nodding in understanding. I met his gaze. Exactly. Damien had always believed the company revolved around him. What he never realized was that the real power lay in the people who trusted us. The clients who invested in our leadership. And now they had a choice to make. Stay with a sinking ship or join the woman who had built it in the first place. By the next morning, my team had a list of Caldwell Corp's top 15 clients. I knew each one by name, not because I had memorized them for business reasons, but because I had built those relationships myself. I had spent years understanding their industries, anticipating their needs, and making sure they trusted Caldwell Corporation with their money. And now I was about to take that trust with me. I set up 5 meetings in the next 3 days, all with long-standing clients who had already been calling with concerns about the instability at Caldwell Corp. I didn't have to convince them to leave. I just had to show them the reality of where things were headed. I arrived at the first meeting early, sitting at the head of a sleek conference table inside Titan Industries' private suite. Across from me sat David Hawthorne, CEO of a high-profile tech firm. He had been one of Caldwell Corp's biggest investors for 3 years. And from the way he looked at me now, I already knew he was considering pulling out. Layla, he greeted, his expression serious. I assume you know why I agreed to this meeting. I nodded, keeping my tone even. Because you're worried. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I invested in Caldwell Corporation because I trusted you. And now you're not there. That tells me I made a mistake. I leaned forward slightly. Then let me ask you something, David. If I was never part of the picture, would you still trust Damien Caldwell to run your investment? A beat of silence. Then he sighed. That's what I thought, I said, my voice softer now. You don't have to be tied to a company just because of history. What you need is stability. And I can give you that. His fingers drummed against the table. I could tell he was already convinced, he just needed the final push. So I gave it to him. Titan Industries is prepared to offer you better terms, faster returns, and leadership you can rely on. I paused, letting my words sink in. That last part is the most important, isn't it? Another beat of silence. Then David nodded. The first domino had fallen. 2 days later the news broke. David Hawthorne had officially moved his investments from Caldwell Corporation to Titan Industries. And Damien was spiraling. I knew it before anyone else did, because Jonathan sent me a message. Jonathan, you've got his attention. He's scrambling. I smirked, typing back. Good. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Damien wouldn't go down quietly. He never did. And I was right. Because that same afternoon, my assistant walked into my office with a tight expression. Damien Caldwell just called, she said, hesitating. He wants to meet with you. I didn't react. Not at first. I had expected this. Still, I took my time setting down my pen, glancing up. Did he sound nervous? She nodded. Very. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Damien was losing control. And now he wanted to talk. I glanced at the city skyline, at the tower that still bore his name. The war had just begun. And I wasn't done yet. I met Damien at a high-end restaurant, the kind that only catered to people who thought they were invincible. He was already seated when I arrived, a drink in front of him. The moment he saw me, his jaw clenched. I smirked. Good. He was feeling it. Layla, he said, his tone forced. I wasn't sure if you'd come. I slid into the seat across from him, taking my time. I was curious. He studied me, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake. I tilted my head. Funny. I was about to say the same to you. His fingers curled around his glass. You don't have to do this. I let out a small laugh. Do what, Damien? Be successful? You already made sure I wasn't welcome at Caldwell Corporation. I'm just doing what you taught me. His eyes darkened. You're trying to destroy me. I didn't respond immediately. Then I leaned forward, my voice softer now. I don't have to destroy you, Damien, I said. You're doing it all on your own. His expression flickered just for a second. Then he exhaled, his mask slipping back into place. This isn't over. I smiled. No, I agreed. It's not. And with that I stood, leaving him sitting alone in the restaurant that once symbolized his power. No. He was the one fighting to stay afloat. And I was just getting started. I walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor, my posture straight, my head held high. I had left Damien exactly where he belonged, on the defensive. The moment I stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me, crisp and cool. But even with the fresh air, I could still feel the weight of the confrontation sitting heavy in my chest. Damien had been rattled. That alone should have felt like a victory. But something about the way he had looked at me, the way his words had lingered. This isn't over. There had been a warning buried in his tone. And if there was one thing I knew about Damien Caldwell, it was that he didn't take losing lightly. I pulled my phone out of my bag, unlocking it with a swipe. A new message popped up on my screen. Jonathan, something's off. I think he's planning something. I stared at the words for a long moment, my gut twisting. I had expected fights, resistance, corporate maneuvering, but this message? This felt different. I tapped out a response. Me, what kind of something? Pause. Then another message came through. Jonathan, I don't know yet. But whatever it is, be careful. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around my phone. Damien wasn't just fighting to keep his company afloat. He was planning his counterattack. The first sign of trouble came the next morning. I was sitting in my office at Titan Industries, reviewing the latest contracts from the clients we had pulled away from Caldwell Corporation when my assistant Rachel knocked on my door. Layla, she said, her voice unusually tense. You need to see this. I glanced up. What is it? She hesitated before stepping forward. placing a stack of printed articles onto my desk. My stomach dropped the second I saw the headlines. Layla Warren faces allegations of corporate espionage. Titan Industries under fire. Did they steal trade secrets from Caldwell Corp? I picked up one of the articles, scanning the words. According to inside sources, former Caldwell Corporation executive Layla Warren has been accused of using confidential company information to manipulate and lure clients away from her former employer. I didn't have to read further to know exactly who the inside source was. Damien. The snake had gone to the press. I set the paper down slowly, my hands steady, but my blood boiling underneath. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. I already spoke to our legal team. We can issue a statement. No, I cut in, shaking my head. That's exactly what he wants. She frowned. What do you mean? I leaned back, exhaling sharply. If we rush to defend ourselves, we look guilty. Damien is testing us, he wants us to panic. Rachel nodded slowly, but concern still flickered in her eyes. So what do we do? I picked up my phone and dialed Jonathan. He answered on the first ring. I saw it. Of course he had. Tell me, I said, my voice low. Did he plant anything inside Caldwell Corporation to make it look real? Pause. Then Jonathan sighed. He's been keeping old, outdated files with your name still attached to them. Nothing actually illegal, but enough to create doubt. I clenched my jaw. So this wasn't just a PR hit. This was a carefully planted lie, wrapped in just enough truth to make people question me. Damien was good. But he had made one mistake. He had forgotten who he was up against. I spent the next few hours reading, watching, analyzing. The headlines were calculated, released in carefully spaced intervals, spreading like wildfire. If I wasn't careful, this could spiral into something irreparable. But I had one advantage Damien didn't. I didn't have to lie to make my case. I pulled up an email, one that had been buried in my inbox for months. A resignation letter. My resignation letter. I had kept a copy of it for my own records, signed and time-stamped before my exit from Caldwell Corp. And attached to that email, a formal clearance document from Caldwell's own legal department, confirming that I had left without taking anything belonging to the company. In other words, Damien's evidence was a complete fabrication. I called Rachel back into my office. Schedule a press conference, I said. Her eyes widened. You want to go public with this? I smiled. Absolutely. By evening, the press room at Titan Industries was filled with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones set up across the podium. I stepped up, my expression calm, unshaken. I could feel the weight of the accusations in the air, but I didn't let them get to me. Good evening, I said, my voice steady. I want to address the allegations made against me and Titan Industries. I reached into my folder and held up the clearance document from Caldwell Corporation's legal team. This document, I continued, is proof that when I left Caldwell Corporation, I did so with complete transparency. The cameras flashed. I placed another document on the podium. And this, I said, is a copy of my official resignation letter, signed months before these accusations ever surfaced. A murmur ran through the room. I let them absorb it for a second before delivering the final blow. The claims against me are not only false, but they were strategically planted by an individual who stands to gain from my downfall. I looked directly into the cameras, making sure my next words hit exactly where they needed to. I encouraged Damien Caldwell to come forward with real evidence, if he has any. I paused, my smile razor sharp. Because I know for a fact that he doesn't. A silence stretched across the room. And just like that, the narrative flipped. The next morning, Damien didn't respond. No official statements. No press appearances. Because he couldn't. He had tried to trap me. Instead, he had walked right into my trap. Rachel walked into my office with a grin. Well, the internet is having a field day. I smirked. Good. I glanced at my phone. No new calls. No more moves from Damien. For now. I knew better than to think this was over. But today I had one. And I was ready for whatever came next. The silence from Damien was deafening. For 2 days he hadn't responded, not to the press, not to the public, and certainly not to me. I knew exactly what that meant. He was trapped. Because if he spoke up now, he would have to produce evidence. Evidence that didn't exist. And if he stayed silent, The world would see him for what he really was. A coward. A liar. A desperate man clinging to the last remnants of his empire. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Anticipation. Because this wasn't just about winning. This was about watching the fall. And I wasn't going to look away. I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a message from Rachel or Jonathan. Instead, the name on the screen made my lips curl into a knowing smile. David Hawthorne. The investor who had been one of Caldwell Corp's biggest backers. I answered. David, I greeted smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? There was a long pause before he sighed. I'm pulling out of Caldwell Corporation completely. I leaned back in my chair. And I'm moving the remainder of my investments to Titan Industries. I let the silence hang between us for a second before responding. You made the right choice. A humorless chuckle from his end. I should have done it sooner. I tapped my fingers against the desk. What was the final push? Another pause. Then his voice dropped lower. I just got word from a source inside Caldwell Corporation. He hesitated. It's worse than anyone knows. I straightened slightly. How bad? Bad enough that Damien won't be able to recover. My grip on the phone tightened. For months I had known Caldwell Corporation was unraveling. But this was something else. Damien wasn't just losing. He was crumbling. And for the first time in my life I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. The next morning the headlines were brutal. Caldwell Corporation faces investor exodus. Stocks drop overnight. Damien Caldwell under pressure as clients flee. Former executives speak out. The company is falling apart. I scrolled through the articles, sipping my coffee, my expression impassive. This wasn't an attack from me. This was Damien's own doing. Every bad decision. Every reckless move. Every blind assumption that he could run a company without the people who built it. It had finally caught up to him. Jonathan called before noon. I answered with a smirk already forming. Tell me, I said, how's the mood at Caldwell Corporation today? He exhaled sharply. You don't even want to know. Try me. There was a pause. Then his voice lowered. Layla. The board is meeting. My smirk faded. Emergency? I asked. Yeah. Jonathan hesitated. And Damien wasn't invited. I straightened. Oh well. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived sooner than expected. The board had finally realized what everyone else already knew. Damien Caldwell was a liability. And they were ready to cut him loose. By evening the official announcement came. Damien Caldwell had been removed as CEO of Caldwell Corp. It was over. Everything he had taken from me. Everything he had thought he could control. Gone. I sat in my office watching the news broadcast, the anchor's voice smooth and professional as she read the statement. In a shocking turn of events, the Caldwell Corporation Board of Directors has announced the immediate removal of CEO Damien Caldwell, following a series of financial setbacks and loss of investor confidence. This decision comes after months of internal conflict and declining performance. The camera cut to a stock image of Damien, his once confident smirk frozen in time. But now there was no power behind it. No arrogance. No control. Because he had none left. I set my coffee down, exhaling slowly. I had thought this moment would feel like revenge. Like victory. But in reality, it just felt like justice. Because Damien had never been my enemy. He had been his own. The phone rang late that night. I didn't have to check the screen to know who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Silence. Then a voice I knew too well. You won. I leaned back in my chair. I know. Another long silence. Then Damien let out a slow, bitter laugh. You planned this from the start, didn't you? I smiled faintly. No, Damien. You did. He exhaled, and for the first time, there was no fight left in him. Nothing but defeat. Do you feel better? He asked. I thought about that for a second. Then I answered honestly. I feel free. And with that I ended the call. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk through the city. No meetings. No deadlines. No strategies running through my mind. Just me. For 6 years I had fought for a company that was never mine to begin with. For 6 years I had been a soldier in someone else's war. Now I was finally free. I reached a small cafe and stepped inside, ordering a black coffee. As I waited, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a woman carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. I saw Layla Warren. And that was enough. Because the real power wasn't in revenge. It was in knowing when to walk away. After a decade of loyalty, my boss smiled coldly. We're replacing you with someone cheaper. Business, nothing personal. I nodded. Thanks for the notice. What they didn't know. I held the patent on the software they depended on. Next morning, their system shut down. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and cold. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the man across the sleek conference table. The man I'd spent 10 years making rich. 10 years of loyalty. 10 years of problem-solving, late nights, fixing their mistakes. And this was how it ended. Bradley Carter, CEO of Genova Tech, leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together like he was doing me a favor. His smirk was subtle, but I caught it. The kind of smug expression people wear when they believe they have all the power. We've decided to bring in someone more cost-effective, he continued, his voice smooth, practiced. It's nothing personal, Ava. Just business. I clenched my jaw, forcing my expression into something neutral. It wasn't just business. It was betrayal. A decade of my life, gone with a single sentence. The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see downtown New York stretching beneath us. Thriving, relentless, a world that never paused. But in that moment it felt like everything had stopped. The board members sat stiffly around the table, avoiding my eyes. Cowards. They couldn't even look at me. I swallowed down the sting of humiliation, keeping my voice even. When does this take effect? Bradley's smirk grew. We'll need you to assist in the transition for the next 2 weeks. Your replacement will shadow you, get up to speed. After that, we'll finalize your severance package. Shadow me. They wanted me to train the very person taking my place. A sharp bitterness curled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I nodded once, standing slowly. Thanks for the notice. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walking toward the door with measured, even steps. My heels clicked against the marble floor. A steady, deliberate rhythm. If they thought I would beg, cry, or plead for my job, they didn't know me at all. As I reached the door, Bradley's voice followed me, casual and dismissive. We appreciate everything you've done, Ava. Really. But change is inevitable. I didn't look back. A decade of loyalty traded for a cheaper model. The elevator ride down felt suffocating. I clenched my fists, breathing in through my nose, trying to suppress the storm of emotions crashing inside me. Anger. Resentment. Betrayal. Not just at Bradley but at myself. Forever believing that loyalty meant something in this industry. I had given everything to Genova Tech. I had built their software architecture from the ground up. Every system, every line of code, every efficiency that made them a powerhouse. It was mine. And they were throwing me away for someone cheaper. The doors slid open and I stepped into the bustling lobby. People rushed past me, lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the fact that my world had just shifted. I barely registered stepping onto the sidewalk, the city air cool against my skin. My thoughts were spinning, replaying every moment, every sacrifice, every night I'd spent hunched over my laptop fixing last-minute crises that weren't even my fault. And then, like a slow dawn breaking through darkness, a realization crept in. They thought they had won. They thought I would just walk away. They had no idea what I still held in my hands. My fingers curled around my phone, my pulse steady now. Controlled. Calculated. Genova Tech ran on my software. Software I held the patent for. I had made sure of it years ago. The system they depended on to process millions of dollars in transactions, to manage their entire operation. It wasn't theirs. It was mine. And they had just severed their only connection to it. I inhaled slowly, tilting my face to the sky, letting the realization settle deep into my bones. I had 2 choices. 1. I could fight for my job, beg them to reconsider, play the game on their terms. 2. Or I could let them burn themselves to the ground. The second option felt much more appealing. I walked home, my mind already crafting my next steps. No rash decisions. No impulsive moves. I wouldn't lash out in anger. I would let them believe they had won. By tomorrow morning I would revoke their rights to my software. The moment my 2 weeks were up, Genova Tech's entire system would start failing. Not through sabotage but legally. They would try to replace me but they would fail. Because my software wasn't something you could just hand off to a cheaper employee. It was intricate, complex, built with a unique architecture that only I fully understood. I reached my apartment, unlocking the door with steady hands. The space was quiet, dimly lit by the city glow outside. I tossed my coat over a chair, exhaling slowly. The anger was still there but it wasn't controlling me anymore. It was fuel. I sat down at my desk, opening my laptop. It was time to make my move. They thought they could replace me. They were wrong. As my fingers danced over the keyboard, pulling up legal documents, patent agreements and contract details, a small smile played at my lips. I wasn't going to destroy them. I was simply going to let them fall apart on their own. Let them see what happens when you take the architect of your success and cast her aside. Tomorrow morning, Bradley Carter would sit in his corner office, sipping his overpriced coffee, feeling smug about replacing me. By the next morning, Genova Tech would be on its knees. And I wouldn't even have to lift a finger. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dim apartment, casting sharp shadows on the walls. My fingers moved with quiet precision, pulling up the legal files that had been sitting in my private cloud storage for years. I had never thought I'd need them, not like this. But something in me had always known. Insurance was necessary when you worked with men like Bradley Carter. I clicked on the patent document, scanning the lines I had nearly memorized. Ownership of software rights, including all derivative works, remains exclusively with the original creator unless a transfer agreement has been legally executed. A slow, deliberate breath left my lips. There was no transfer agreement. They had built their empire on my software, and they never even thought to take ownership of it. Arrogance, carelessness, stupidity. It didn't matter which. It only mattered that it was my advantage now. I pulled up the formal revocation request. One click, one submission, and everything they relied on would cease to belong to them. Not yet, I told myself. Not tonight. Tonight I would let them sleep easy. Let them go home, sip their expensive wine, and feel victorious. Tomorrow morning the real game would begin. I shut my laptop, pushing back from my desk. My mind was buzzing but my body was drained. 10 years in a company and just like that I was nobody to them. The thought should have stung but all I felt was clarity. They saw me as disposable, but they had no idea that they were the ones skating on thin ice. Without me they were nothing. I stood, stretching my arms before heading to the kitchen. The hum of the city outside filled the silence. The aroma of the coffee I hadn't touched earlier still lingered in the air. I wrapped my fingers around the cool ceramic of the mug, staring at the skyline beyond my window. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. The next morning I woke early, moving through my apartment with quiet purpose. Today was a normal day. A normal morning. If anyone looked at me, they wouldn't see the woman whose entire career had been discarded just 24 hours earlier. They wouldn't see the gears turning behind my calm expression. By the time I arrived at Genova Tech, the office was already buzzing with activity. I stepped out of the elevator, moving through the familiar rows of workstations, past the glass offices where executives barked orders into Bluetooth headsets. I was greeted with stiff nods, awkward half-smiles. People knew. Word spread fast in places like this. No one wanted to be the next name on Bradley Carter's list. I reached my office. No, not mine anymore. I corrected myself as I saw her. The replacement. She sat at my desk, clicking through files on my computer. Her blonde hair was tied back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore the same kind of tailored blazer I had once worn when I believed in this company. I should have felt something, resentment, anger, jealousy. But all I felt was certainty. She wouldn't last here. She wouldn't survive what was coming. The final instruction. Bradley called me into his office before noon. He leaned back in his chair, watching me with that same smug expression he'd worn yesterday. "I assume you'll be professional about this," he said, gesturing toward my replacement. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Of course." He chuckled. "Good. I knew you'd see reason." He didn't know anything. I spent the afternoon walking my replacement through the system. I answered every question, pointed out important files, all while knowing that in less than 24 hours, none of it would matter. I wasn't cruel. I didn't want her to fail. But this wasn't about her. This was about them. The day dragged on. At 5:30 sharp, I packed up the last of my things. A few old notebooks, a framed photo I had forgotten was even there. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Bradley's office. He was on the phone, laughing, probably celebrating the fact that he had cut costs without a hitch. He had no idea. No idea that the foundation of his company was already cracking beneath him. I stepped into the elevator, letting the doors close. One more night. That's all they had left. At 6 a.m. I logged into my private terminal. The legal request had already been approved. Genova Tech's license to my software was officially revoked. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, calm, collected, certain. At precisely 8:32 a.m. my phone buzzed. Emergency alert. Internal system failure detected. I smirked. Right on time. By 9:15 a.m. Genova Tech was in chaos. Bradley's assistant was the first to call. Ava, hi, listen, we need you to come in. There's a situation. Her voice was rushed, laced with panic. I glanced at the time. Smiled. Oh. What kind of situation? Everything's down. The client portals. The internal databases. IT says it's a licensing issue, but she stopped, her breath heavy. They said the software isn't ours anymore. That's because it's not. I'm sorry, I said, keeping my voice even. That's really not my problem anymore. I could hear voices in the background. Someone, probably Bradley, was yelling. The assistant sucked in a shaky breath. Look, can you just come in? Maybe we can. I ended the call. I wasn't going back. I had already given them everything. I watched the news unfold from the comfort of my apartment. By noon, Genova Tech was making headlines. By 2 p.m., investors were pulling out. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Bradley Carter was scrambling to salvage his empire. Me. I was already building something new. They never saw me coming. I didn't ruin them. I didn't sabotage or hack or break anything. I simply let them fall under the weight of their own arrogance. Tomorrow morning, Bradley Carter would wake up to the remains of the company he thought he could run without me. I would wake up free, with nothing to lose and everything to gain. I leaned back in my chair, coffee in hand, my laptop open in front of me. The chaos was already unfolding and I didn't even have to lift a finger. The news was everywhere. Tech giant Genova faces major system outage. Clients left in the dark. A slow smile curled at the corner of my lips as I scrolled through the articles. It had only been a few hours, but the panic was spreading fast. Clients were furious, investors were jumping ship, and I knew exactly what was happening in that glass tower I used to call my office. Bradley Carter was losing control. He thought he could replace me. He thought I was disposable. He was learning the hard way. The first signs of trouble. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Bradley Carter. I let it ring. And ring. And ring. Then silence. I could imagine him, his frustration mounting, pacing his office, trying to salvage the mess he created. The IT team would be scrambling, refreshing their screens over and over, trying to fix something that wasn't broken. It was simply no longer theirs. I took a sip of coffee, the rich, bitter taste grounding me. They had no plan. No backup, no contingency, nothing. Because I was the plan. And I was gone. Inside that conference room, I knew exactly how it was playing out. I had been in those meetings before, just never on this side of the disaster. Bradley would be sitting at the head of the table, his hands clenched into fists, his temper barely contained. I need answers. His voice would be sharp, urgent. Why is everything failing? The IT director, probably sweating through his dress shirt, would shift in his seat. Sir, it's not a crash. It's a licensing issue. Bradley would pause, confused. What do you mean? A heavy breath. A reluctant answer. Ava Sinclair revoked our access. Silence. I could almost hear the sharp inhale, see the color draining from Bradley's face as those words sank in. That's... His voice would waver before he forced control back into it. That's impossible. We own the software. A longer silence. Then the quiet, fatal words. No, sir. She does. I tapped my fingers against my coffee mug, waiting for the next call. It wouldn't take long. Bradley would be spiraling, his mind scrambling for a way out. He prided himself on control, on being 5 steps ahead. But this time, he never even saw it coming. My software wasn't just a tool, it was the backbone of Genova Tech. Every client dashboard, every internal process, every security measure. All of it was built on my architecture. No. They had nothing. I refreshed my inbox. More notifications. More alerts. Genova Tech was bleeding out and I had only just begun watching. My phone vibrated again, but it wasn't Bradley this time. It was an unknown number. I smirked. The board. They had realized what was happening. Bradley's charm wouldn't save him now. Not when their stock was plunging, their clients were demanding refunds, and every major news outlet was reporting the disaster. I let the call go to voicemail. I already knew what they wanted. They wanted a fix. They wanted me. But I wasn't their employee anymore. I wasn't their safety net. They had made that choice. The ultimate power shift. By mid-afternoon, the full extent of the damage was sinking in. The board was furious. Investors were pulling out. Competitors were poaching clients like vultures circling a dying animal. Another call. Another voicemail. This time I listened. Ava, this is Richard Lyman from the board. We, need to discuss a solution. We're hoping to negotiate a way to. I deleted the message before he finished. They weren't hoping to negotiate. They were desperate. I knew it was coming. Bradley's name flashed on my phone again. I let it ring. Then on the fourth try I picked up. Hello, Bradley. There was silence on the other end. A hesitation. Then his voice tight with frustration. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers drumming against my knee. Do we? A sharp exhale. Ava, come on. I know you're upset. I laughed softly. Not the kind of laugh that meant I was amused. The kind that said I wasn't buying his nonsense. Upset. I repeated, savoring the word. Bradley, I'm not upset. I'm just watching the inevitable unfold. His breathing was tense on the other end. You made your point, all right? But we can fix this. You can come back. I cut him off. Come back. I let the silence hang between us before I spoke again. You really don't get it, do you? Bradley said nothing. So I continued. You thought I was just another name on a payroll, I said, my voice measured. You thought you could replace me with someone cheaper. But here we are. And tell me, Bradley, how's that working out for you? Nothing. Just the sound of his defeat settling in. Ava. He tried again, but his voice was different now. Quieter. Weaker. I'll double your salary. Triple it. Just. I sighed. Bradley. He stopped. I don't want your money, I said, my tone final. I just want you to understand something. Another pause. Then. You needed me. I never needed you. And with that I hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment, then set it down beside me. I felt nothing. No guilt. No remorse. Just the quiet satisfaction of justice. Genova Tech was failing and there was nothing they could do about it. Tomorrow morning, Bradley would wake up to the remains of the company he thought he built. Me. I would wake up free. With nothing to lose and everything to gain. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly. The weight of finality settled over me, not as an anchor but as a quiet triumph. Genova Tech was unraveling thread by thread and I didn't need to lift a finger. I had done my part. The rest? Gravity would take care of. The city outside my apartment stretched wide and endless, bathed in the golden hues of late afternoon. I stared at it for a moment, then leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms above my head. It was almost poetic, really. They had thrown me away. Now they were drowning without me. The frantic attempts to fix the unfixable. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, my inbox had flooded with desperate emails. Subject: urgent. Please respond. Subject: let's talk. Subject: immediate assistance needed. The messages were all the same. Empty pleasantries, forced apologies, hollow requests for a conversation. I didn't reply. Instead I refreshed the news. Stock drops 37% in a single day as Genova Tech faces catastrophic system failure. A soft hum of satisfaction stirred in my chest. Investors weren't just pulling back. They were running. I scrolled further. CEO Bradley Carter issues statement. We are working to resolve the situation. I clicked on the link, watching the embedded video load. There he was. Bradley sat stiffly at the press conference table, his shirt slightly wrinkled, something I had never seen before. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked defeated. I turned up the volume. We understand the concerns our clients and investors have, he said, his voice carefully controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it. We are working closely with our team to address the technical issues and will provide updates as soon as possible. A reporter's voice cut in, sharp and demanding. Mr. Carter, is it true that Ava Sinclair, your former head architect, revoked the company's access to the software? Bradley's jaw twitched. For a moment he didn't speak. Then his fingers tightened around the microphone. No comment. I smirked. The comment sections were ruthless. How do you fire the one person who built your company? Looks like someone made a huge mistake. This is why you don't undervalue your employees. Karma at its finest. The backlash wasn't just contained to the media. It was spilling into the real world. Clients were dropping contracts, citing breach of service agreements. Vendors were pulling partnerships, unwilling to associate with an unstable company. And the employees? They were turning on him. Desperate calls and empty apologies. At exactly 7:45 p.m. my phone rang again. I stared at the screen, watching Bradley's name flash across it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, just as expected, it rang again. This time I answered. Ava. His voice was taut with frustration, but there was something else woven into it. Something I had never heard before. Panic. I took my time responding. Bradley. He exhaled, the sound sharp and forced. I need to see you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, that's interesting. You didn't seem to need me a few days ago. Pause. I was wrong. The words were clipped, forced from between gritted teeth. Look Ava, I know you're upset. I laughed, cutting him off. I'm not upset, Bradley. I'm watching you choke on your own arrogance. Silence. He cleared his throat. I'll offer you triple your salary. I'll rewrite your contract. Hell, I'll give you part ownership. Just come back and fix this. I smiled. Bradley, I said slowly, savoring his desperation. You still don't get it, do you? Another silence. You didn't just fire me, I continued. You treated me like I was nothing. Like I was disposable. Like I wasn't the reason your company thrived. And now you want me back. No, Bradley, I cut in smoothly. You don't get to undo what you did. You don't get to fix this with money or apologies. This isn't about revenge. I let the words hang, then added, voice calm and even. This is about consequences. I hung up. Legal consequences hit hard. The next morning I woke up to another wave of headlines. Genova Tech faces multi-million-dollar lawsuits as clients demand compensation. Shareholders call for CEO Bradley Carter's resignation amid crisis. I clicked through the articles. The lawsuits were pouring in. Corporate partners claiming contract violations, small businesses citing lost revenue, even individual consumers joining class action suits. The board was in chaos. Investors had completely lost confidence, and now, Bradley's own executives were turning on him. I let out a quiet breath, taking a sip of my coffee. I had never wanted this to turn into a spectacle. But that's the thing about arrogance. It makes people blind to their own destruction. By noon it was official. The board had forced Bradley Carter out. The same board members who had nodded along as he dismissed me, they had now dismissed him. It was poetic, really. I sat at my desk, scrolling through my messages. A flood of job offers, partnership inquiries, invitations from competitors who had been waiting for an opportunity like this. I could start over. Build something better. Something mine. A soft exhale left my lips. Bradley had thought he was invincible. He had thought he controlled everything. But power isn't just about money. It's about who holds the foundation. And I had always held it. He just realized it too late. I closed my laptop. No more emails. No more calls. Genova Tech was no longer my concern. They had tried to replace me. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had destroyed themselves. And me. I wasn't looking back. Because the best revenge is simply proving you never needed them to begin with. I closed my laptop with finality, the hum of the city outside filling the quiet space of my apartment. Genova Tech was no longer my concern. The emails, the calls, the frantic attempts to pull me back into their sinking ship. It was all over. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. For the first time in a long time I felt something unfamiliar. Weightless. The past 10 years had been spent chasing deadlines, solving crises, and proving my worth to people who never truly valued it. Now there was no one left to impress, no fires to put out, no boss looming over me with false promises. I was free. And yet as I stared out at the glowing skyline, another realization settled in. What now? The silence in my apartment was unnerving. No urgent notifications, no meetings to prepare for, no endless cycles of proving myself. It was just me. For years I had defined myself through my work. Ava Sinclair, the architect of Genova Tech's success. The woman who held it all together. But now, I wasn't just the person who took them down. I had to become something else. Something more. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the flood of job offers and partnership requests. Competitors, startups, even investment firms. They all wanted me. They had watched the downfall of Genova Tech and saw exactly what I was capable of. But I didn't just want another job. I didn't want to spend another decade building someone else's empire. I wanted my own. The industry takes notice. By morning, the business world had already shifted. The same industry insiders who had once praised Genova Tech were now dissecting its downfall. One architect. One decision. The collapse of a giant. How Ava Sinclair outmaneuvered the very company that betrayed her. I wasn't just a former employee. I had become a symbol, the cautionary tale for companies that undervalued their talent. And that was powerful. I stepped out onto my balcony, the crisp morning air biting against my skin. The city stretched out before me, alive with possibilities. I had the leverage, the name, the reputation. Now I just needed a plan. I spent the next few days sketching out ideas, making calls, reaching out to old connections. People I trusted. People who knew what I could do. The idea was simple. Build something better. I didn't want another tech firm bloated with bureaucracy and greed. I wanted innovation without the corporate rot. A company that thrived on talent, not exploitation. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. That part was over. No. I wanted to win. The messages from Genova Tech didn't stop. Bradley had gone silent, but others weren't giving up so easily. Ava, we can fix this. Name your price. We made a mistake. Let's rebuild together. Each message was another reminder of how quickly power shifts when you realize who actually holds it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Their company was in ruins and I wasn't interested in salvaging it. I had bigger plans. A week later, I walked into the offices of a venture capital firm. A place I once would have been nervous to step into, back when I was just an employee trying to prove my worth. But today, I wasn't here to ask for a job. I was here to launch something of my own. I sat across from the firm's director, a man who had followed my career for years. He leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his gaze. Ava, what's next for you? I smiled. I'm building something new. His expression shifted, interested, intrigued. Tell me more. And so I did. I told him about my vision. About a company that wouldn't just replicate what Genova Tech had done, but reinvent the entire industry. About a workplace where talent was valued, where the next generation of architects wouldn't have to fight to be seen. By the time I finished, there was no hesitation. We'll fund you, he said. Whatever you need. I exhaled slowly, shaking his hand. This wasn't just a deal. It was the beginning of something unstoppable. That evening, I stood in front of my laptop one last time. I clicked on Genova Tech's website, watching as their stock hovered at its lowest point in a decade. The forums were filled with speculation. Would they survive? Would they recover? I already knew the answer. It didn't matter. I closed the tab. Then, without a second thought, I deleted every email, every voicemail, every trace of the company that had once defined me. I wasn't Ava Sinclair, the woman they discarded. I was Ava Sinclair, the woman who had rebuilt herself. And this time no one would ever take me for granted again. The best revenge is never needing them again. I took one last deep breath before shutting my laptop. The past was done. No. The future was mine to build. He changed our anniversary dinner reservation to a table for two. For him and his colleague. I sat at the bar, sipping champagne, watching him slip my bracelet onto her wrist, calling it a family heirloom. I walked over, unclasped it and smiled. You're right. It belonged to my grandmother. Along with the house you're now evicted from. He laughed, until security arrived with her husband. I left them both with the bill and a restraining order. Happy anniversary, darling. I wasn't supposed to be at the bar tonight. I was supposed to be seated at table 23, the best spot in the house, with a perfect view of the patio fountains and the Chicago skyline beyond the glass. But there I was, perched on a bar stool in my own restaurant, watching my husband of 8 years slide my grandmother's bracelet onto another woman's wrist. The champagne tasted bitter against my tongue as I observed them from across the room. I'd worked 16-hour days for months to bring Harvest Moon to life, my dream restaurant finally a reality. Opening night had been flawless so far. The critics were impressed, the dining room was packed, and my signature autumn squash risotto had received nothing but praise. Everything was perfect except for the table I couldn't stop staring at. "Is everything all right, chef?" Marco, my head bartender, refilled my flute with Dom Perignon, the same bottle I'd been saving for Axel and me to share tonight. "Our 8th anniversary. Just taking a breather," I lied, forcing a smile. "The kitchen has everything under control." Before we begin this journey of betrayal and sweet revenge, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me at tonight's table. If you're hungry for more stories of women reclaiming their power when the world serves them heartbreak, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps our community of survivors and thrivers grow stronger. Now let's. 30 minutes earlier, I'd slipped away from the controlled chaos of the kitchen to freshen up before Axel arrived. We had reservations at 8, a table for 2 that I'd personally arranged with a tasting menu that told the story of our relationship through food. 8 courses for 8 years. I'd even asked the pastry chef to recreate our wedding cake for dessert. My phone had dinged with a text message as I was reapplying my lipstick. "Need to change reservation to accommodate colleague. Table for 2, but I'll be bringing Hazel from the campaign office. You understand? Happy anniversary, will make it up to you." I'd stared at that message for a full minute, my heart sinking as I reread those clinical words. You understand? Did I? This wasn't the first time Axel had prioritized his budding political career over our marriage. But bringing another woman to our anniversary dinner? That was new. I'd called the maitre d' immediately. "There's been a change to my husband's reservation," I said calmly. "Please keep his table for 2 but add a glass of our best champagne at the bar. That'll be for me." Now I watched as Axel laughed at something Hazel said, his hand lingering on her forearm. She was everything I wasn't, polished in that campaign-ready way, with honey blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her red dress hugged curves that my chef's coat had hidden for years. I tugged self-consciously at my black dress, the one I'd bought especially for tonight, now feeling like an afterthought in my own restaurant. 8 anniversaries. The first, we'd gone camping in Michigan, making love under the stars after a dinner of hot dogs and beans. The 5th, Paris, where Axel had surprised me with cooking classes at Le Cordon Bleu, the push I'd needed to finally pursue my culinary dreams. Last year he'd forgotten entirely, coming home at midnight with a hastily purchased gas station rose and mumbles about campaign meetings running late. I fingered the stem of my champagne flute, remembering how we used to be. Before the campaign. Before his ambitions for state senate consumed everything. Before I became a box to check on his path to political success. Supportive wife, check. Small business owner, check. All-American backstory, check. The sommelier approached their table with the wine I'd selected for us, a 2012 Barolo that we'd first tasted on our honeymoon in Italy. Axel was making a show of it, explaining the wine to Hazel as if he were the expert. I watched her lean forward, captivated by whatever story he was telling. Then the light caught something on her wrist and my entire body went cold. The bracelet. My grandmother's tennis bracelet. Delicate diamonds set in white gold, with a distinctive Art Deco clasp that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. I'd worn it on our wedding day as my something old. It had been in my family for 3 generations. I remembered the day I'd shown it to Axel, telling him about my grandmother pawning it during hard times to keep our family afloat, only to buy it back years later with her saved tips as a waitress. How she'd given it to me on her deathbed, making me promise to only share it with someone worthy of our family's resilience. Axel was gesturing animatedly now, clearly deep into some campaign anecdote. I caught fragments, family heirloom, and passed down for generations. He was telling my family story, claiming my history as part of his narrative. And Hazel was looking at that bracelet with awe, running her fingers over the diamonds that should have been on my wrist tonight. My shock crystallized into something harder, colder. This wasn't just a forgotten anniversary or a career prioritized over marriage. This was theft of my heirloom, my history, my dignity. Marco, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off their table, could you please call Harrison from security? Tell him I need assistance with a situation in about 10 minutes. Of course, chef. Is everything okay? It will be, I replied, setting down my champagne. It absolutely will be. As I slid off the stool, smoothing down my dress, I noticed another man seated at the far end of the bar. He kept glancing toward Axel's table, his expression darkening with each look. He was nursing what appeared to be his third whiskey, wedding ring glinting under the ambient lighting. Something about his discomfort resonated with mine. My mind raced as I approached the hostess stand, checking the reservation system. There it was, Hazel Montgomery. A quick social media search confirmed my suspicion. The man at the bar was Stephen Montgomery, Hazel's husband. The reservation had originally been in his name before Axel changed it. I felt a calm clarity wash over me as the pieces fell into place. The betrayal was even more calculated than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just an inappropriate work dinner. They hadn't even tried to be discreet, using their real names, coming to my restaurant on my anniversary. I took a deep breath and made my way toward their table, my chef's instincts taking over. In the kitchen, timing is everything. The perfect moment to remove a steak from heat, to add the final seasoning, to present the dish. This confrontation required the same precision. As I approached, Axel still hadn't noticed me. He was too engrossed in whatever lie he was spinning, one hand now covering Hazel's, the diamonds of my grandmother's bracelet catching the light between their intertwined fingers. 3 steps away and I finally caught his eye. For just a second, I saw panic flash across his face before he composed himself, plastering on that campaign-ready smile I'd grown to despise. Melody. There you are, he exclaimed too loudly. I was just telling Hazel about your restaurant. Join us. In that moment, looking at my husband pretending nothing was wrong while another woman wore my family's legacy on her wrist, something inside me hardened into diamond-like resolve. 8 years of compromises, of stepping back so he could step forward, of swallowing disappointment, it all ended tonight. I smiled, feeling more powerful with each step toward their table. Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world, darling. Happy anniversary to us, indeed. Time seemed to slow as I approached their table, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation I never imagined having on what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. My focus narrowed to the glittering diamonds encircling Hazel's wrist. Diamonds that held stories she couldn't possibly understand. The bracelet had first belonged to my great-grandmother Josephine, a wedding gift from her husband before he left for World War II. When he never returned, that bracelet became her lifeline. She sold 1 diamond at a time to feed her children during those desperate years, replacing each stone as she built a small dressmaking business from her kitchen table. By the time she passed it to my grandmother Eleanor, every diamond had been earned twice over. Mom always said that bracelet carried our family's tenacity in each stone. Diamond hard, diamond bright, she would whisper, running her fingers over the clasp. That's how Thompson women survive. I remembered sitting at my grandmother's vanity as a child, watching her fasten that bracelet before heading to her night shift. Eleanor had worked as a waitress at Callahan's Diner for 37 years. First to put my mother through college, then to help my parents when Dad's construction business faltered. The bracelet would catch the light as she poured coffee, the only luxury she allowed herself. Why don't you sell it? I once asked her during a particularly lean month when I overheard my parents discussing unpaid bills. We could get a new car. Eleanor had cupped my face in her hands, her eyes fierce despite her gentle touch. Melody Jane, some things are worth more than their price tag. This bracelet isn't just diamonds, it's every sacrifice, every triumph, every moment we chose courage over comfort. Someday when you understand what really matters, it'll be yours. I understood in 2008, when the Great Recession hit and my grandmother faced foreclosure on the small craftsman house my grandfather had built with his own hands. I was in culinary school then, barely making ends meet myself. She called me one evening, her voice strained but determined. I'm pawning the bracelet tomorrow, she said simply. Gran, no. There must be another way. I can drop out, get a full-time job. This is exactly what it's for, she interrupted. Your education matters. This house matters. The bracelet has saved this family before and it will again. For 9 months, the bracelet sat in a pawnshop while my grandmother worked double shifts despite her arthritis, while I catered events between classes, while we both pretended not to count the days until the loan would default. I still remember the afternoon we walked into that shop together, how her hands trembled as she counted out the cash, the last payment with $23 to spare. "See," she said, clasping it back onto her wrist where it belonged. "Diamond hard, diamond bright." When she died 3 years later, I was the only one at her bedside. My parents had moved to Arizona by then and my sister was stationed overseas. Eleanor slipped the bracelet from her wrist to mine with the last of her strength. "Remember what really matters," she whispered. "And only share this with someone worthy of our legacy." I thought Axel was worthy. We met when he came to the restaurant where I was sous chef, campaigning for city council. He charmed everyone, remembering names, asking thoughtful questions about the neighborhood. When he asked for my number, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our courtship was a whirlwind. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening much like tonight, he proposed at the lakeshore. I said yes without hesitation, certain I'd found someone who valued family and hard work as much as I did. A week before our wedding, I showed him the bracelet for the first time, telling him its history as we sat on the porch swing of my grandmother's house. Our house now. "This is remarkable," he said, examining the antique clasp. "It must be worth a fortune." "It's priceless," I corrected him. "It's survived the depression, war, recession, everything life has thrown at the women in my family." Axel looked at me with such tenderness then. "I'll never let anything happen to it or to you." 2 days after our wedding, I found him studying the insurance appraisal. "Just being responsible," he explained. "Something this valuable needs proper protection." I believed him. I believed him about so many things. 4 years into our marriage, when Axel decided to run for state senate, our savings weren't enough for the campaign launch. We sat at our kitchen table reviewing our assets when he suggested refinancing the house. "This is my grandmother's house," I protested. "It's been paid off for years." "It's an investment in our future," he countered. "Once I'm elected, we'll pay it off again in no time." When I hesitated, his eyes fell on my wrist. "What about the bracelet?" "Just temporarily, we could get a short-term loan against it." The hurt must have shown on my face because he immediately backtracked. "I'm sorry, that was thoughtless. I know what it means to you." That night, I made the decision that seemed like trust at the time. I slipped the bracelet into his hand. "Keep it in the safe at your office," I said. "I'm afraid of something happening to it during restaurant prep, and this way it's safe but still with us." He'd kissed me deeply. "I'll guard it with my life." That was the last time I saw my grandmother's bracelet. Until tonight, gleaming on another woman's wrist, being passed off as some generous gift from my husband. As I stood before their table now, looking at Hazel's perfectly manicured fingers tracing the diamonds that represented my family's struggle and triumph, a cold clarity washed over me. The legacy of this bracelet wasn't just about maintaining a family heirloom, it was about the strength to do what needed to be done no matter how difficult. My grandmother had pawned this bracelet to save what mattered. Now it was my turn to reclaim not just the diamonds but everything they stood for. "What a beautiful piece," I said, my voice steady as I locked eyes with my husband. "Would you mind if I had a closer look?" Hazel's smile faltered as she glanced between Axel and me. "Oh, of course," she said, extending her wrist with practiced charm. "It's absolutely stunning." I gently took her hand, examining the bracelet while Axel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The tension at the table was palpable, but I wasn't ready for the confrontation. Not yet. I needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal first. "Exquisite craftsmanship," I remarked, releasing her wrist. "Axel has excellent taste in family heirlooms." I gave him a pointed look before adding, "I should get back to the kitchen. Enjoy your meal." I walked away, feeling Axel's eyes burning into my back. Instead of returning to the kitchen, I reclaimed my spot at the bar, this time positioning myself where I could observe their table without being obvious. Marco slid a fresh glass of champagne toward me without a word. From this vantage point, I could see how Axel leaned in too close when speaking to Hazel, how her hand occasionally brushed his, how they shared glances that spoke of more than professional camaraderie. Each interaction revealed layers of intimacy that had clearly developed over time. I thought back to the first sign something was wrong in our marriage. 6 months ago, Axel had started coming home smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Campaign events, he'd explained. You shake 100 hands, hug dozens of supporters. I'd nodded, ignoring the fact that the scent was always the same. Then came the late-night strategy sessions that couldn't be interrupted. The weekend retreats with his campaign team that I wasn't invited to attend. The sudden password on his phone, for security reasons. Each oddity I'd rationalized away, making excuses for the man I thought I'd married. Refill? Marco asked, interrupting my thoughts. I shook my head. I need to stay clear-headed. 3 months ago, I'd found a receipt for a hotel downtown in his suit pocket while doing laundry. When confronted, Axel had an explanation ready. A donor meeting ran late and it didn't make sense to drive home. The hotel was 3 blocks from our house. Last month, I'd stopped by his campaign headquarters unannounced, bringing lunch for everyone. His secretary was flustered, saying he was in a meeting that couldn't be disturbed. Through the frosted glass of his office door, I could make out 2 silhouettes standing suspiciously close. Even then, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Axel was an affectionate person. He stood close to everyone. He touched people's arms when he spoke to them. I was being paranoid, letting my insecurities get the best of me. My gaze drifted to the man at the end of the bar, Stephen Montgomery, still nursing his whiskey, still watching their table. How much did he know? Had he suspected before tonight, or was this betrayal as fresh for him as it was for me? The sommelier was clearing Axel and Hazel's appetizer plates now. They seemed to have already moved on from the awkwardness of my visit, laughing together over something private. Axel's hand disappeared beneath the table. I turned away, the ache in my chest surprising me despite everything. Chef, one of my line cooks approached, looking concerned. The Mortons are asking to speak with you about their anniversary cake. Tell them I'll be right there, I said, grateful for the distraction. As I made my rounds through the dining room, checking on guests and accepting compliments on the food, I maintained a professional smile. No one would guess that the chef owner was experiencing the most humiliating night of her life. Years in the kitchen had taught me to compartmentalize, to function through burns, cuts and kitchen disasters. This was just another kind of pain to work through. When I finished with the Mortons, I purposely took a path that led me past Axel's table. They were midway through their entrees, speaking in hushed tones. I slowed my pace just enough to catch fragments of their conversation. Once the campaign succeeds, Axel was saying. But what about her? Hazel's voice, laced with concern. She'll understand eventually. The restaurant keeps her busy. And the prenup protects most of our assets. And your house. It's in both your names, isn't it? Axel chuckled. Technically yes. But she's so sentimental about it being her grandmother's that she'll let me buy her out for far less than it's worth. My steps faltered. So this wasn't just an affair. They were planning a future together. A future that involved disposing of me like an inconvenient appliance that no longer served its purpose. I continued to the kitchen on autopilot, checking plates and directing the staff without truly seeing any of it. My mind was racing, piecing together conversations and incidents that suddenly made perfect sense. 2 weeks ago, Axel had asked me to sign documents, updating our estate planning. I'd been so busy with the restaurant opening that I'd merely skimmed them, trusting him as I always had. Had those papers been setting the stage for our separation? The bracelet wasn't just a romantic gesture to his mistress. It was a calculated move. He was already treating my family heirlooms as his own, already parceling out my legacy. I returned to the bar, needing another moment to collect myself. Stephen Montgomery had shifted closer to my seat, his expression darkening as he continued to watch Axel and Hazel. When our eyes met, I saw my own pain reflected back at me. They work together? He asked quietly, gesturing with his glass. I nodded. She's his campaign manager. Funny, he said, his voice bitter. She told me she was having dinner with a female colleague tonight. Said they needed to prepare for a donor event tomorrow. The realization that we were both being lied to exactly the same way sent a cold shiver down my spine. I'm Melody, I said, extending my hand. This is my restaurant. Stephen, he replied, his handshake firm. And apparently that's my wife with your husband. Just then Axel leaned across the table and whispered something that made Hazel laugh. She glanced around before reaching into her purse and sliding an envelope across to him. He opened it discreetly, his expression changing to one of triumph as he reviewed the contents. "What are they doing?" Stephen muttered. "I don't know," I said, but a suspicion was forming. "Excuse me." I approached the hostess stand once more, this time checking the campaign's financial records on my phone. There it was. A substantial donation from Montgomery Construction had been recorded last week. Stephen's company. Returning to the bar, I showed him the screen. "Did you authorize this donation to Axel's campaign?" His face drained of color. "That's not possible. We're nearly bankrupt from the housing market downturn. Hazel handles our personal finances, but she knows the business can't afford political donations right now." The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was professional, financial, and perhaps even criminal. Hazel wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was embezzling from her own. I watched Axel pocket the envelope, his other hand still resting possessively on Hazel's arm, his fingers brushing against my grandmother's bracelet. "Stephen," I said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Stephen's construction-roughened hands gripped his whiskey glass tightly. "I'm listening." We moved to a quiet corner of the bar, away from curious ears. I explained what I'd seen and heard, laying out the evidence of both betrayals, personal and financial. With each detail I shared, the slump in his shoulders lessened, replaced by a straightening of his spine. "She's been handling the books since the recession hit," he said, voice low with controlled anger. "Said she had a degree in finance I didn't know about. Turns out there's a lot I didn't know." "How much could she have taken?" I asked. "Enough to sink the company if this keeps up. We've got 30 families depending on Montgomery Construction for their paychecks." I watched Axel signal for dessert menus, acting like he owned the place. In a way, he did. The restaurant startup costs had come from our joint savings, which he never missed an opportunity to remind me of. I'd assumed we were building something together. Now I realized I was just another asset in his portfolio, a stepping stone on his path to political success. "We need to be strategic about this," I said, an unfamiliar calm settling over me. "If we confront them emotionally, they'll find a way to twist it, make us look like the irrational ones." "I'm not feeling particularly rational right now," Stephen muttered. "I know. Neither am I. But the best revenge isn't just exposing them, it's making sure they face consequences they can't charm their way out of." My years in professional kitchens had taught me that timing and preparation were everything. We need evidence, witnesses, and the perfect moment. Harrison, my head of security, appeared at my elbow. I'd hired him away from one of Chicago's most exclusive hotels, valuing his discretion as much as his imposing presence. "You needed to see me, chef?" I gave him a quick overview of the situation. His expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes darkened when I mentioned the embezzlement. "So it's not just a domestic issue," he said thoughtfully. "No. And I'd like to handle it without disrupting the other diners' experience if possible." Harrison nodded. "I've got 2 of my team on tonight. We can position them near the table when you're ready. Just give me a signal." He hesitated. "Do you want me to call the police as well?" I considered this. "Not yet. Let's see what evidence we can gather first." After Harrison stepped away, I turned back to Stephen. "How much do you know about what they've been doing?" "Not enough," he admitted. "But I've got access to all our company accounts on my phone. If what you're saying is true." He pulled out his device and began scrolling through financial records. Meanwhile, I stepped into the kitchen to check on service and gather my thoughts. My sous chef, Vanessa, caught my eye immediately. "Everything okay, chef? You look like you're planning a murder." "Just some unexpected drama with table 14, I said, forcing a smile. "Can you handle the pass for another 20 minutes? "Of course." He studied my face. "Need backup?" "Maybe. I'll let you know." I returned to the bar to find Stephen staring at his phone, ashen-faced. 3 separate transfers to his campaign fund over the last month. $60,000 total. Money we don't have, disguised as materials purchases. My mind raced through the implications. Illegal campaign contributions. Financial fraud. The perfect leverage. "I've got their entire conversation recorded," Stephen said, showing me his phone. "Started recording when I realized who he was with. Illinois is a 2-party consent state for recordings, but..." He shrugged. "But it's enough to confront them with," I finished. And combined with the financial records. Exactly. I checked the time. Axel and Hazel were lingering over dessert and champagne. His hand kept returning to her arm, fingers brushing against my grandmother's bracelet. The sight crystallized everything for me. In 20 minutes they'll ask for the check, I said. Axel always gets uncomfortable if dessert lasts longer than that. It's our best window. Before they've paid but after they've consumed everything. Stephen's eyes met mine, understanding dawning. So they can't just walk out. Precisely. I waved Marco over. When table 14 asks for their bill, stall. Tell them the system is processing. Give me a 3-minute warning. I excused myself to make a quick call to my lawyer, leaving a detailed voicemail about the prenuptial agreement and my concerns about the recent documents I'd signed. Then I texted my sister, asking her to send me digital copies of our grandmother's will and the house deed. Preparation had always been my strong suit. When I returned, Stephen had composed himself. I've contacted my company's attorney. He's pulling every financial record we have. If she's been embezzling, we'll find it all. Harrison approached again, standing respectfully at attention. My team is in position, he said quietly. Just give the word. I nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of gratitude for these people who barely knew me yet were ready to stand by my side. When Marco gives the signal, we move. The next few minutes stretched eternally as we finalized our approach. When Stephen and I discovered we lived only blocks apart, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They've been meeting at the Reed Street Motel, he said. Found charges on our credit card statement. Thought it was for business clients. 3 blocks from our house, I said, remembering Axel's hotel receipt. They weren't even trying to be careful. They thought we weren't paying attention, Stephen replied, a new resolve in his voice. They were wrong. Marco caught my eye and held up 3 fingers. The signal. Axel was asking for the check. I took a deep breath and smoothed down my dress. It's time. Want me to come with you? Stephen asked. Not initially. Let me start this. When I look back toward the bar, that's your cue. I caught my reflection in the mirrored backsplash behind the bar. For the first time since reading Axel's text, I felt fully present in my body. The hurt was still there, but it had transformed into something powerful. I wasn't just a betrayed wife or a woman scorned. I was the granddaughter of Eleanor Thompson, who had pawned her most precious possession to save what mattered, who had worked double shifts with arthritis-gnarled hands to reclaim her legacy. Diamond hard, diamond bright. Harrison fell into step slightly behind me as I began the walk across the restaurant floor. Each step felt deliberate, my path clear. The murmur of dinner conversation, the clink of silverware, the subtle notes of the playlist I'd personally selected, all of it formed the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. I wasn't just going to confront my husband. I wasn't just going to reclaim my bracelet. I was going to reclaim everything, my family home, my dignity, my future. Years of compromise and accommodation fell away with each step, replaced by a certainty I hadn't felt since before I met Axel. As I approached their table, I caught Hazel's eye first. Her smile faltered as she registered my expression and the large man following behind me. Axel was still studying the bill, oblivious to the approaching storm. Time to serve the final course. Enjoying dessert? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady as I stopped at their table. Axel's head snapped up, his politician's smile immediately sliding into place. Melody, come join us. The chocolate soufflé is exceptional. Your pastry chef deserves a raise. I remained standing, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Hazel fidgeted with her napkin, not meeting my eyes. I don't think I properly introduced myself earlier, I said to her. I'm Melody Thompson Reed, Axel's wife. Today is our 8th anniversary. Her eyes widened, darting to Axel, who laughed dismissively. Honey, I explained about the dinner change. Hazel and I have that donor meeting tomorrow and we needed to prep. His voice carried just the right note of reasonable explanation, the tone he used when convincing constituents he had their best interests at heart. I smiled. Interesting. Because the donation was made last week, according to the campaign finance records. I turned to Hazel. How's Stephen doing, by the way? Still at the bar, watching his wife and my husband celebrate our anniversary. The color drained from her face. Axel's expression hardened as he realized this wasn't going to be smoothed over with his usual charm. You're making a scene, he said quietly, his eyes flicking to nearby tables. We can discuss this at home. Actually, we can't. You see, I've been reviewing those documents you had me sign 2 weeks ago. The ones you claimed were routine estate planning. I leaned closer. Did you really think I wouldn't have my lawyer examine them once I had a moment to breathe? You tried to trick me into surrendering my grandmother's house. Hazel shifted in her seat. Axel, maybe we should. No, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone, aware of watching eyes. Melody is confused. Everything I've done has been to secure our future. Our future. I raised an eyebrow. Or yours and Hazel's? His jaw tightened. I could see him calculating his next move, weighing public perception against damage control. That's absurd, he finally said. Hazel is my campaign manager. This is a working dinner. I gently reached for Hazel's wrist, turning it so the bracelet caught the light. Then why is she wearing my grandmother's bracelet? The one you told me was in your office safe. A nearby diner glanced over, curiosity piqued. It's similar but not the same piece, Axel attempted, his confidence wavering slightly. Perhaps you've forgotten the inscription, I said, unclasping the bracelet from Hazel's wrist despite her startled protest. I turned it over, revealing the tiny engraved words on the clasp. Diamond hard, diamond bright. To Eleanor with love, 1941. Axel's expression shifted from confident to cornered. I felt a flicker of satisfaction watching him squirm. I thought it would be a nice gesture, he began, his voice low. Just for the evening. A nice gesture? I interrupted. To give away a family heirloom I specifically told you represented generations of my family's struggles? To let another woman wear my grandmother's legacy while you dined at the table I reserved for our anniversary? The whispers from nearby tables grew audible. I sensed Harrison positioning himself closer, his 2 security team members discreetly flanking the area. You're overreacting, Axel hissed, abandoning his public persona as panic set in. It's just jewelry. And there it was, confirmation that he'd never truly understood what the bracelet symbolized, what my family's legacy meant. He'd seen it only as an expensive trinket, a potential asset to leverage. I lifted my hand, the signal for Stephen to approach. As he made his way toward us, I held the bracelet up to the light. This, I said clearly, belonged to my grandmother Eleanor Thompson, who worked 37 years as a waitress at Callahan's Diner. Who pawned it during the recession to save our family home. The same home you've been trying to remortgage without my knowledge to fund your campaign. Axel's eyes darted between me and the approaching Stephen, realization dawning. Speaking of your campaign, I continued, I wonder what the ethics committee would think of unreported donations from Montgomery Construction? Especially since Mr. Montgomery here never authorized them. Stephen reached the table, his expression cold and controlled. Hello, Hazel. Stephen, she gasped. This isn't, you don't understand. I understand exactly what's happening, he said quietly. I've spent the last hour reviewing our company finances. Care to explain the $60,000 transferred to Reed's campaign fund? Money we don't have. The remaining color drained from Hazel's face. Axel reached for his water glass, his hand visibly shaking. This is ridiculous, he blustered. A simple misunderstanding. If we could just... Mr. Reed, Harrison interrupted smoothly, I'm going to have to ask you and Ms. Montgomery to remain seated until we've resolved this situation. Axel's eyes hardened as he took in the security personnel. Are you detaining us? That's illegal. I'm an elected official and... No one's detaining you, I clarified. But since you haven't paid your bill yet, leaving would constitute theft of services. And given the potential campaign finance violations and embezzlement concerns, I thought you might prefer to discuss this privately rather than with the police. The mention of police made both of them flinch. Several diners were openly watching now, phones discreetly recording. Axel's political instincts kicked in as he realized how damaging this scene could become. Let's be reasonable, he said, forcing a smile. We can work this out. I slipped the bracelet onto my own wrist where it belonged. There's nothing to work out. The restraining order my lawyer is filing tonight will keep you away from my grandmother's house, which, as her will clearly states, was left to me alone before we were married. The prenup you insisted on works both ways, Axel. His face contorted with fury before he managed to school his features. You wouldn't dare. Think about what this will do to my campaign. I'm sure the voters will find it fascinating, Stephen interjected. Along with the company funds my wife apparently diverted to support it. Hazel began to cry, not the elegant tears of a wronged woman but the ugly sobbing of someone caught in their own trap. Stephen, please. I can explain everything. Save it for our attorneys, he replied coldly. I reached for the untouched champagne flute at their table. The same vintage I'd selected for our anniversary celebration. Raising it in a toast, I met Axel's eyes one last time. To new beginnings, I said. Happy anniversary, darling. I set the glass down without drinking and turned to Harrison. Please ensure Mr. Reed and Ms. Montgomery settle their bill before leaving. Everything else is in their names: hotel charges, campaign contributions, legal consequences. As I walked away, I heard Axel calling my name, his voice stripped of its usual authority. I didn't look back. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen, my grandmother's kitchen, preparing a private dinner for the restaurant investors who had helped me buy out Axel's share of Harvest Moon. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed once the campaign finance investigation began. The bracelet caught the light as I chopped herbs back where it belonged. The restaurant had thrived despite, or perhaps because of, the publicity. People came initially for the gossip but returned for the food. The Chicago Tribune's glowing review had called my fall menu a revelation of resilience transformed into culinary art. Stephen had stopped by earlier with a bottle of wine and news that his company was finally recovering after Hazel's embezzlement was exposed. We developed an unexpected friendship, two people rebuilding their lives from similar betrayals. Nothing romantic, we were both too raw for that, but something equally valuable: mutual respect and understanding. Axel's political career had imploded spectacularly. Last I heard, he was working at his father's insurance company in Milwaukee, his campaign dreams shattered by ethics violations and public humiliation. As I prepared the table setting out my grandmother's china, I realized I was humming, something I hadn't done in years. The house felt alive again, filled with purpose and possibility rather than compromise and concealed resentments. Diamond hard, diamond bright. The Thompson women endured. We rebuilt. We thrived. And sometimes, when justice was served at just the right temperature, we even celebrated with a perfect final toast. If you enjoyed watching Melody serve justice alongside her 5-star menu, please hit subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you have done in her situation? Your support helps bring more stories of triumph to this channel. At the family dinner, my sister-in-law joked, "Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband." My husband laughed, "Maybe she has a secret." Everyone joined in. I just smiled, stood up and handed him an envelope. "Since we're sharing secrets, open this." The laughter stopped. His face turned white. "Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband." Daisy's words sliced through the warm evening air like a blade through silk. The dining room, moments before filled with the comfortable chatter of family dinner, suddenly felt arctic. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused midair. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. I had spent 7 days preparing for this dinner. 7 days of scrubbing, cooking, arranging, and rearranging everything to perfection. The pot roast had been slow cooking for 8 hours, seasoned with herbs from my own garden. Our best china, the Waterford set we'd received as a wedding gift, gleamed under the chandelier. I'd even driven to 3 different flower shops to find the perfect autumn arrangement for the centerpiece. Why? Because after 3 years of marriage, I was still desperately trying to prove myself worthy of being Jared's wife to his family. Still trying to show them I wasn't just some girl their golden boy had settled for, but someone who could elevate their family name. The irony wasn't lost on me now, sitting there with Daisy's cruel words echoing in my ears. She sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her wine glass, that smirk playing on her lips like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. Daisy had always been jealous of me, I knew that. Jared's younger sister had been the family princess until I came along, and she'd never quite forgiven me for stealing even a fraction of the spotlight. But this was different. This wasn't just sisterly competition. This was calculated cruelty designed to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered. I turned to Jared, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting, no needing, him to defend me. To defend us. to stand up and tell his sister that her comment was completely inappropriate and hurtful. That George was beautiful and perfect and absolutely, undeniably his son. Instead, my husband, the man who had promised to honor and protect me, let out that nervous laugh. That awful, weak chuckle he always made when he wanted to fit in with his family instead of standing up for what was right. "Maybe Olivia has a secret," he said, and I felt something inside me shatter like crystal hitting concrete. The betrayal was instant and complete. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't say. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend our son. He threw me to the wolves to earn a few cheap laughs from people who would never truly accept me anyway. The laughter that followed was like acid in my veins. His mother, Patricia, who had insisted I call her mom but always said it with a slight hesitation, actually giggled behind her napkin. His father, usually so stern and proper, was chuckling into his whiskey. Even his cousin Rebecca, who I'd thought liked me, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes sparkling with the kind of malicious delight that comes from witnessing someone else's downfall. But it was Maria's reaction that hurt almost as much as Jared's betrayal. Our housekeeper, who had been with us since George was born, who had seen me cry from exhaustion during those first sleepless months, who knew how much I loved my son. Even she froze in the doorway with the dessert plates, her kind eyes wide with shock and something that looked dangerously close to pity. I could hear George's soft breathing through the baby monitor on the side table. My beautiful, innocent 10-month-old son was sleeping peacefully upstairs while the adults he should be able to trust were destroying his mother's reputation downstairs. He had no idea that his legitimacy was being questioned, that his very existence was being treated like a punchline. The worst part, the part that made my stomach churn with a mixture of rage and heartbreak, was that this wasn't the first time Jared had questioned George's parentage. From the moment our son had been placed in my arms at the hospital, Jared had been planting seeds of doubt like a farmer preparing a toxic harvest. "His nose looks too sharp for our family," he'd whispered one evening when he thought I was asleep, studying our newborn son's face like he was searching for evidence of my infidelity. "Are you sure about the timing?" he'd asked me just last month, pretending it was casual conversation while we watched George play with his blocks. But I'd caught the calculation in his eyes, the way he was mentally counting backwards from George's birth date. I'd seen him staring at our son during bath time, during feeding time, during those precious quiet moments when George would babble and reach for his father's face. Instead of love and wonder in Jared's expression, I'd seen confusion, suspicion, and something that looked disturbingly like disappointment. Each incident had been small enough to dismiss, private enough to pretend it hadn't happened. I told myself he was just adjusting to fatherhood, that new dads sometimes felt disconnected from their babies. I'd made excuses for him the way wives do when they're not ready to face the truth about their marriages. But this dinner, this public humiliation in front of people whose approval I'd been desperately seeking for years, was the line I couldn't pretend he hadn't crossed. I looked around the table, taking in each face. Patricia was still smiling, that cold, satisfied smile she got when she felt superior to someone. Robert was reaching for the wine bottle, completely comfortable with what had just transpired. Rebecca was whispering something to her husband, probably already planning how she'd share this gossip with the rest of the extended family. And Jared, my husband, my partner, the father of my child, was avoiding my eyes entirely, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his dinner plate. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. They were all waiting for my reaction, probably expecting tears or protestations or maybe even a dramatic exit. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to break down so they could comfort each other about poor Jared being married to such an unstable woman. Instead, something crystallized inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I wasn't going to beg for their approval or defend myself against accusations that any decent person would know were baseless. I was going to do something better. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Every eye in the room followed me as I smoothed my dress and walked toward the bedroom with the kind of calm that comes from finally knowing exactly what needs to be done. Behind me, I could hear confused murmurs starting up again, probably wondering if I was going to pack a bag or call my mother or lock myself in the bathroom to cry. They had no idea that I was walking toward something that would change all of our lives forever. In my jewelry box, underneath the pearls Jared had given me for our anniversary, lay a plain white envelope. I'd been carrying this secret for months, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Tonight, surrounded by people who thought they knew better than I did about my own life and my own child, was exactly the right moment. When I returned to that dining room, envelope in hand, I would show them all exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has finally had enough. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope as I pulled it from beneath my pearl necklace. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 3 months of secrets and the power to obliterate everything Jared and his family thought they knew about me. It had been a Tuesday morning in July when I'd finally reached my breaking point. George had been napping and I'd found Jared in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with that distant expression he'd been wearing more and more lately. When I'd suggested we take a family photo for George's baby book, he'd actually flinched. Maybe when he's older, he'd mumbled, not even looking up from his screen. When his features are more defined. As if our son was some incomplete sketch rather than a perfect, beautiful child who deserved his father's unconditional love. That afternoon, after Jared left for work, I'd sat on our bedroom floor with my laptop, researching DNA testing facilities. Not the at-home kits that everyone advertised on television. Those felt too casual, too unreliable for something this important. I needed clinical accuracy, professional documentation, irrefutable proof. The drive to Riverside Genetics took exactly 43 minutes. I'd chosen them specifically because they were far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't risk running into anyone we knew. The building was sterile and anonymous, tucked between a dental office and a tax preparation service in a strip mall that could have been anywhere in America. Dr. Martinez had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but her expression grew serious when I explained what I needed. She was probably in her 50s. With graying temples and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every family secret imaginable. "Are you sure about this?" she'd asked, her voice gentle but firm. "These tests can have consequences beyond just answers. Sometimes the truth creates more problems than the uncertainty." I'd considered her warning for exactly 3 seconds before nodding. "I need to know." The sample collection had felt surreal, like I was gathering evidence for a crime I hadn't committed. George's hair came from his little brush, golden strands so fine they almost floated away when I breathed too close. I'd wrapped them carefully in a clean tissue, my hands shaking slightly as I sealed them in the provided container. Jared's toothbrush had been easier to obtain but harder to stomach. Standing in our bathroom at 5 in the morning, carefully scraping bristles into a plastic bag, I'd felt like a stranger in my own home. This was what my marriage had become. Covert operations and secret investigations instead of trust and communication. The laboratory's waiting room had been nearly empty that morning, just me and an elderly man who kept checking his watch nervously. I'd filled out paperwork with steady hands, providing my contact information and selecting expedited processing. 2 weeks felt like an eternity, but standard processing took a month and I couldn't wait that long. Those 14 days had been the longest of my life. Every morning I'd wake up wondering if today would be the day the results arrived. Every evening I'd check our mailbox with my heart pounding, simultaneously hoping for and dreading the familiar logo of Riverside Genetics. Meanwhile, Jared's behavior had somehow gotten worse. He'd started working late more often, claiming new projects and demanding clients. When he was home, he'd interact with George like he was handling borrowed property. Careful, distant, temporary. During bath time, instead of the silly voices and playful splashing that used to fill our bathroom, there was only mechanical efficiency. The breaking point had come during a family barbecue at his brother's house. Jared's nephew Tommy had run up to show George a toy truck, and everyone had started commenting on how much the two boys looked alike. Normal family chatter, the kind of comparison that happens at every gathering. But I'd caught Jared's expression. A flash of something ugly and suspicious, like he was analyzing genetic evidence instead of watching children play. Later, when his sister-in-law had mentioned how much George resembled Jared at that age, he'd actually said, "Do you think so? I'm not sure I see it." I'd excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes, gripping the sink so hard my knuckles went white. The envelope had arrived on a Thursday, mixed in with utility bills and grocery store circulars like it was just another piece of routine mail. My hands had trembled as I'd torn it open, scanning past the technical jargon to find the conclusion that would determine the rest of my life. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The relief had been so overwhelming I'd actually sat down hard on our kitchen floor, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. All those months of whispered doubts, all those questioning looks, all those moments when I'd wondered if I was going insane, vindicated by cold, scientific fact. But the relief had quickly transformed into something else. Fury. White-hot, consuming rage at my husband for putting me through this hell. For making me doubt myself. For treating our son like a question mark instead of a blessing. I'd stared at those results for 3 hours, crying tears that shifted from relief to anger to something resembling grief. Because even though I now held proof of what I'd always known, something fundamental had broken between Jared and me. The fact that I'd needed this test at all meant our marriage was already damaged beyond simple repair. The smart thing would have been to confront him immediately. To march into his office, slam the papers on his desk, and demand an apology for months of psychological torture. But something deeper and more calculating had taken hold of me that day. I'd driven back to Riverside Genetics and requested multiple copies on official letterhead. Professional, undeniable documentation that no one could question or dismiss. I'd had them printed on heavy paper stock, the kind used for important legal documents, and requested sealed envelopes with the laboratory's official stamp. One copy went into our safe deposit box. Another into a folder with our important financial documents. But the third, the one I'd chosen for maximum impact, went into a plain white envelope that I'd hidden in my jewelry box, underneath the pearls Jared had given me for our second anniversary. For weeks, I'd carried this secret like a weapon I wasn't ready to use. Every time Jared made another cutting comment about George's appearance, I'd touch that envelope through my jewelry box and feel a surge of power. Every time his family exchanged those knowing looks at dinner parties, I'd remind myself that I held the truth while they wallowed in their ugly assumptions. The hardest part had been watching Jared with George, seeing doubt where there should have been unconditional love. Our son would reach for his father's face with those chubby little hands, babbling happily, completely unaware that the man holding him was questioning his very legitimacy. But I'd waited, patient as a hunter, for exactly the right moment to reveal what I knew. Tonight, with Daisy's cruel words still echoing in our dining room and Jared's betrayal fresh and raw, that moment had finally arrived. Now, standing in our bedroom with that envelope in my hands, I could feel the weight of 3 months' worth of silence about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The walk back to the dining room felt like a procession to an execution, except I wasn't the one about to die. My footsteps were deliberately measured, each one echoing against the hardwood with a finality that seemed to announce that everything was about to change forever. They were still sitting exactly where I'd left them, frozen in an uncomfortable tableau of guilt and curiosity. Patricia had her wine glass halfway to her lips, suspended in mid-sip. Robert was cutting his roast with mechanical precision, clearly hoping to avoid eye contact. Rebecca whispered something urgent to her husband, who just shook his head and focused intently on his dinner plate. But Jared was fidgeting with his napkin, folding and refolding it into increasingly smaller squares. The nervous energy radiating from him was almost palpable, like he could sense something dangerous approaching but couldn't quite identify the threat. When I appeared in the doorway, envelope in hand, the entire room seemed to inhale collectively and hold its breath. "Since we're sharing secrets tonight," I said, my voice carrying across the room with crystalline clarity, "open this." I placed the envelope directly in front of him, my fingers lingering for just a moment on the white paper. The contact was electric, not romantic but charged with 3 months of accumulated power and the promise of revelation. Jared's cocky expression, the one that had been so casually cruel just minutes before, flickered like a candle in wind. He glanced up at me and for the first time in months, I saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't the wife he'd grown comfortable dismissing. This wasn't the woman who absorbed his family's mockery and his suspicious comments with martyred silence. This was someone new, someone who held cards he didn't even know were in play. "What's this about, Olivia?" His voice had lost its earlier confidence, taking on the cautious tone he used when he wasn't sure if he was in trouble. I didn't answer. I simply stood behind his chair, close enough that he could feel my presence, far enough that he had to crane his neck to see my face. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that everyone could feel it, though they couldn't yet understand why. Jared picked up the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. He turned it over, examining it like he was looking for clues about its contents. There was nothing to see, Just plain white paper with his name written in my careful handwriting. "Just open it," I said quietly, and something in my tone made even Patricia stop pretending to eat. He slid his finger under the flap casually, probably expecting a bill or maybe some appointment reminder that I'd been nagging him about. His movements were still lazy, still tinged with the arrogance that had allowed him to humiliate me just minutes earlier. But the exact instant, his eyes found the letterhead at the top of the page, everything changed. DNA Paternity Testing Laboratory was printed in bold, professional letters across the top of the document. Below it, in smaller but equally official font, were the words that would haunt him: conclusive paternity analysis results. I watched his face transform like I was seeing a time-lapse video of aging. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly I thought he might actually faint. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. He read the first paragraph, then started again from the beginning. His eyes moved frantically across the page, searching for some mistake, some loophole, some way for this document to say anything other than what it clearly stated. His fingers began to tremble. Actually tremble like he was suffering from some sudden illness. The paper rustled as his hands shook, and that small sound seemed unnaturally loud in the absolute silence that had fallen over the room. 20 years of swagger, of easy confidence, of casual cruelty, all of it crumbled in the space between one heartbeat and the next. This was the man who'd questioned his own son's legitimacy for months, who'd made me feel like a liar in my own home, who'd just thrown me under the bus for a few cheap laughs. Now he couldn't even form words. The silence stretched like taffy, becoming thicker and more suffocating with each passing second. I could hear George's soft breathing through the baby monitor, peaceful and innocent upstairs while his father's world collapsed downstairs. The grandfather clocks ticking suddenly seemed thunderous. Even Maria had stopped moving in the kitchen, probably sensing the tension from 3 rooms away. "What is it, Jared?" Daisy's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. She was leaning forward now, her earlier smugness replaced by vulture-like curiosity. She reached across the table with greedy fingers, trying to snatch the paper from her brother's paralyzed grip. I moved faster than I'd thought possible, stepping forward and placing my hand firmly over the document before she could touch it. My palm covered the results completely, but I could feel the weight of truth beneath my fingers. "Let your son explain what he's been accusing me of for months," I said, my voice carrying a deadly calm that made Patricia actually gasp. The words hung in the air like a curse. Everyone understood now that this wasn't just about whatever was on that paper. This was about months of hidden accusations, private suspicions, and the systematic destruction of trust in our marriage. Jared tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound that might have been the beginning of my name. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, then tried again. "Olivia, this isn't..." He stopped, apparently realizing that every possible explanation would only make things worse. I waited. Let him struggle. Let them all watch him try to find words that didn't exist for what he'd done. Rebecca cleared her throat nervously. "Maybe we should..." "No." I didn't raise my voice, but the single word carried enough authority to silence her immediately. "We shouldn't do anything. Jared should explain to everyone why he felt the need to have his son's paternity tested in secret. Except he didn't do it in secret, did he? He just made accusations. He just planted doubts. He just made me feel like a criminal in my own home." Robert set down his fork with deliberate care, the sound of metal against china sharp and final. "Jared, what is she talking about?" But Jared couldn't answer. The man who had been so quick with cruel jokes and suspicious comments was now mute, staring at the proof of his own shameful behavior while his family watched him crumble. I removed my hand from the paper, letting them all see the official letterhead, letting the weight of professional documentation speak for itself. Then I walked to George's high chair, where my beautiful son was playing with his food, completely oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around him. I lifted him gently, kissing his forehead as he babbled happily and reached for my earrings with those perfect little fingers. He smelled like baby shampoo and innocence, like everything pure and good in a world that adults had made ugly with their suspicions and cruelty. When I turned back to face the table, George content in my arms, my silence was more devastating than any accusation I could have made. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need words. It just needs space to breathe. The silence shattered like glass when Jared finally found his voice, though what emerged was hardly recognizable as the confident man who'd been cracking jokes minutes earlier. "Olivia, honey, it was just..." He stumbled over words like a drunk trying to navigate stairs, his face cycling through expressions of panic, shame, and desperate calculation. "You have to understand, it was just family banter. We were all just joking around." I bounced George gently in my arms, feeling his warm weight against my chest like armor. My son gurgled happily, reaching for the chandelier's light with chubby fingers, blissfully unaware that his legitimacy had just been proven beyond any shadow of doubt. "Jokes," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Is that what we're calling months of questioning your son's paternity? Jokes." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Patricia's wine glass trembled in her grip, and I watched Robert's jaw work silently as the full implications of what I'd just revealed began to sink in. Jared's hands were still shaking as he set the DNA results on the table, but he couldn't seem to stop looking at them, as if staring might somehow change what they said. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. People talk, they comment on how different he looks, and I just..." "What people?" I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to slice steel. "Your sister? Your family? The same people who just spent the evening making me feel like an outsider in my own life." Daisy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since her failed grab for the papers, suddenly found her voice again. "We were just messing around, Olivia. God, you're being so dramatic about this whole thing." But her bravado was paper-thin now, and everyone could hear it. The woman who'd delivered that cruel opening line with such poisonous confidence now sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. "Messing around," I said, and my laugh was completely devoid of humor. "You made a joke about my child's legitimacy in front of his father's entire family, and when my husband, who should have defended us, decided to pile on instead, you all laughed. That's your idea of messing around." George chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, clapping his hands together as if applauding the performance. The sound was so innocent, so purely joyful, that it made the adult's behavior seem even more grotesque by comparison. My calmness was clearly unnerving them more than any screaming fit would have. I could see it in their faces, the way they kept glancing at each other, waiting for me to break down, to give them the emotional explosion that would let them dismiss me as unstable or overreacting. Instead, I just stood there holding my son, letting the truth do all the heavy lifting. It was Robert who broke first. Jared's father, a man who'd built a successful construction business through sheer stubborn pride and who I'd never once heard admit he was wrong about anything, looked directly at me with something that might have been respect. "I owe you an apology, Olivia." His voice was gruff but sincere. "What happened here tonight was completely inappropriate. You deserved better from all of us, especially from my son." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, and I saw tears actually forming in her eyes. Genuine tears, not the crocodile variety she'd deployed at various family gatherings when she wanted sympathy. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching across the table toward me with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry. We never should have. Jared never told us he was having these doubts, and we certainly never should have participated in that awful joke." Even Rebecca, who'd been whispering and giggling behind her hand just minutes earlier, looked mortified. She kept glancing between her dinner plate and my face, clearly wishing she could disappear entirely. "I think I should probably call an Uber," she mumbled to her husband, who nodded eagerly. But it was Daisy's reaction that surprised me most. The woman who'd started this whole mess, who'd delivered that opening blow with such calculated cruelty, was now staring at me with something that looked almost like fear. "You planned this," she said suddenly, her voice high and accusing. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you brought that envelope down here." I shifted George to my other hip and smiled, really smiled, for the first time all evening. "You're absolutely right. I did plan this. Just like you planned that little comment about George not looking like his father. The difference is my plan was based on truth." Daisy's face flushed red, then pale, then red again. She pushed back from the table so violently that her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "This is ridiculous. I'm not sitting here and listening to this anymore." She grabbed her purse from the side table, but I caught the flash of embarrassment in her eyes before she could hide it behind righteous indignation. "No one's forcing you to stay," I said mildly. "But before you go, maybe you should think about why you felt the need to make that comment in the first place. Was it really about George's appearance, or was it about something else entirely? She froze halfway to the door, and for a moment I thought she might actually engage with the question. But Daisy had never been one for self-reflection. "You're impossible," she spat and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the hardwood until the front door slammed behind her. The silence that followed her exit was different from the earlier tension. Heavier somehow, weighted with the reality of what had just transpired. Jared cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe we should talk privately about this, Olivia. Work through." "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. "Secrets deserve an audience, Jared. Just like your joke did." He flinched as if I'd slapped him, which in a way I supposed I had. "You wanted to air your doubts about our son's paternity in front of your family," I continued, my voice steady as stone. "You wanted to make me the punchline of your cruel little joke in front of people whose respect I've been trying to earn for 3 years. So now we handle the consequences the same way, publicly." The power dynamic in that room had shifted so completely that I could practically feel it in the air. These people who had been laughing at me, dismissing me, treating me like some kind of outsider or fraud, they were now watching me with something that looked remarkably like respect. And for the first time since I'd married into this family, I genuinely liked what they saw when they looked at me. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze of forced normalcy. Robert and Patricia made awkward small talk about the weather while Rebecca and her husband escaped as soon as politely possible, mumbling excuses about early morning commitments. Maria cleared the barely touched dinner plates with the kind of careful silence that spoke volumes about what she'd witnessed. But it was later that night, after the last guest had left and George was finally asleep in his crib, that the real reckoning began. I stood in our bedroom staring at the suitcase I'd pulled from the closet. It wasn't a large bag, just the navy blue overnight case I'd bought for weekend trips before George was born. But something about seeing it open on our bed, waiting to be filled, felt monumental. Jared appeared in the doorway like a ghost, his face still pale from the evening's revelations. He watched me fold a sweater with methodical precision, each crease sharp and deliberate. "What are you doing?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile peace we'd managed to construct. "Packing." I didn't look up from the dresser drawer, my hands steady as I selected undergarments and nightclothes. "I need some space to think." "You're leaving." The panic in his voice was immediate and raw. "Olivia, please, we can work through this. Tonight was you publicly humiliating the mother of your child," I said, placing a pair of jeans in the suitcase with the same careful precision I'd used for everything else. "Tonight was you questioning your son's legitimacy in front of your entire family instead of defending him. Tonight was you choosing their cruel laughter over my dignity." He took a step into the room, his hands outstretched like he was approaching a wounded animal. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But leaving isn't going to solve anything." I finally turned to face him, really look at him, and was struck by how small he seemed. This man who had seemed so confident, so sure of himself just hours earlier, now looked like a child caught in a lie he couldn't talk his way out of. "I'm not leaving permanently," I said, and watched the relief flood his features. "But I am showing you that I can. The woman you married, the one who would have cried herself to sleep and pretended this never happened, she's gone, Jared." The truth of those words settled between us like a physical presence. Something fundamental had shifted in that dining room, and we both knew there was no going back to who we'd been before. "Tell me what you need," he said, and there was a desperation in his voice I'd never heard before. "Tell me how to fix this." I closed the suitcase and sat on the edge of our bed, studying his face in the lamplight. "Marriage counseling. Real counseling, not just a few sessions so you can say we tried. Full financial transparency. I want access to every account, every investment, every decision. And a public apology to everyone who heard you question George's paternity." He nodded frantically, agreeing before I'd even finished speaking. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. Olivia, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." But his immediate capitulation, rather than reassuring me, only highlighted how desperate he was to return to the status quo. This wasn't about understanding what he'd done wrong. This was about damage control. "You agreed very quickly," I observed, lifting the suitcase from the bed. "Almost like you're not really thinking about what any of those things mean." "I am thinking," he protested, but his eyes were fixed on the bag in my hands. I just want us to be okay again. We're not going to be okay again, Jared. Not the way we were. I moved toward the door and he stepped aside to let me pass. We might be something new, something different. But the marriage where I begged for your family's approval and swallowed your suspicions? That's over. Over the next 3 days I stayed at my sister's house, sleeping in her guest room while George napped in a portable crib we'd set up by the window. Jared called every few hours, sent flowers, left voicemails full of promises and explanations. But distance had given me something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: clarity. When I returned home I came back different. Not just emotionally but practically. The first thing I did was change the password on our joint checking account, something I'd never done in 5 years of marriage. Then I called our financial advisor and requested copies of all our statements, investments, and insurance policies. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, clearly confused by my sudden interest in finances I'd previously left entirely to Jared. "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I'm just taking a more active role in our financial planning." It was amazing what I discovered once I started looking. Jared had been handling our money competently enough, but he'd also been making decisions, significant ones, without consulting me. A retirement account I hadn't known existed. Investment choices that prioritized his business over our family's security. Small things perhaps, but they painted a picture of a man who saw me as a passenger in my own life rather than a partner. I didn't confront him about these discoveries immediately. Instead, I quietly began transferring important documents to a safety deposit box in my name only. Birth certificates, marriage license, insurance policies, anything that might be crucial if our marriage didn't survive what we were going through. The most surprising discovery came when I was organizing our household files. Buried in a folder marked miscellaneous were 3 estimates for paternity testing services, all dated from 2 months after George was born. Jared had been researching DNA tests almost from the beginning, but had never followed through. Until I did it for him. I sat in our home office staring at those crumpled estimates, and felt the last piece of my old self crack and fall away. The woman who had trusted blindly, who had assumed her husband's love meant he believed in her completely, was truly gone. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, but also more honest. If Jared could question something as fundamental as his son's paternity, then I needed to question everything else too. Our finances, our future, our compatibility. Nothing could be taken on faith anymore. That evening, when Jared found me reorganizing our important papers, he tried to make light of it. "Spring cleaning a little early this year?" I looked up at him, really looked, and saw not my protector or my partner but someone I needed to protect myself from. The realization was both devastating and liberating. "Something like that," I said, filing away the bank statements I'd been reviewing. "Just making sure I understand our situation completely." For the first time in our marriage I was preparing for a future that might not include him. And surprisingly, that possibility didn't terrify me the way it once would have. It felt like freedom. 2 months later, George's first birthday party arrived like a test I hadn't studied for. The house was decorated with cheerful balloon arrangements and a banner that read, "Happy First Birthday, George," in bright primary colors, but underneath the festive atmosphere, tension simmered like water just before it boils. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, not out of perfectionist tendencies this time, but because I needed this day to be about George, not about the family drama that had preceded it. The guest list included our neighbors, my college friends, Jared's co-workers, and extended family members who hadn't been present for that infamous dinner. But they all knew. Word travels fast in families, especially when it involves DNA tests and public humiliation. Patricia arrived early, carrying an enormous wrapped present and wearing the kind of determined smile that suggested she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Olivia, darling, the decorations look wonderful," she said, kissing my cheek with theatrical warmth. Robert followed behind her, shaking Jared's hand with the careful formality of men trying to pretend nothing had changed between them. But I caught the way his eyes lingered on George, as if he was seeing his grandson clearly for the first time. My sister Jenny helped me arrange the food table, whispering updates about who had arrived and who was still expected. "Is she coming?" she asked, not needing to specify who she meant. I shook my head. Daisy sent her regrets. That was putting it diplomatically. What Daisy had actually sent was a brief text 3 days earlier. "Won't be able to make George's party. Hope he has a nice day." No explanation, no attempt at reconciliation, just cold dismissal wrapped in polite language. Honestly, her absence was a relief. The party was complicated enough without having to navigate around the woman who'd started this entire mess. As guests filtered into our backyard, I watched Jared work the crowd with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd been building up to something all day. He kept glancing at me, then at his watch, then back at me like he was waiting for some predetermined signal. The moment came after we'd sung, "Happy Birthday," and George had gleefully destroyed his smash cake, getting more frosting on his face than in his mouth. The crowd was laughing and taking pictures when Jared suddenly stood up, clearing his throat with the kind of theatrical gesture that demanded attention. "I'd like to say something," he announced, and conversations gradually died away until all eyes were focused on him. My stomach clenched. We'd discussed this moment during one of our counseling sessions, but experiencing it in real time felt surreal and deeply uncomfortable. "First, thank you all for being here to celebrate our son's first birthday," Jared began, his voice carrying across the yard with surprising steadiness. "George is obviously the star of today's show, and seeing him surrounded by so much love means everything to us." He paused, and I could see his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. This was the moment we'd been building toward, the public accountability I demanded as part of our marriage's reconstruction. "But I also need to address something that some of you may have heard about," he continued, and I felt the entire party's energy shift. People stopped chewing, stopped sipping their drinks, stopped pretending they weren't hanging on every word. A few months ago, I made some comments and had some doubts about George's parentage that were completely unfounded and incredibly hurtful to my wife. His voice cracked slightly on the word unfounded, but he pushed through. "I questioned something that should never have been questioned, and I did it in a way that was disrespectful and cruel." I could see faces in the crowd processing this information. Some with shock, others with the kind of knowing expressions that suggested the gossip mill had already reached them. Olivia had a paternity test done to prove what she should never have had to prove, that George is my son, 99.99% certain, beyond any shadow of doubt. He looked directly at me then, and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes, not just performance anxiety. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I'm sorry for doubting you, for hurting you, and for making you feel like you had to defend yourself against accusations that should never have been made." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Our neighbor Mrs. Chin looked genuinely shocked. My friend Sarah was staring at Jared like he'd grown a second head. Even George seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, sitting quietly in his high chair with frosting-covered fingers. It should have felt like vindication, like justice, like the victory I'd been unconsciously seeking since that horrible dinner 2 months ago. Instead, it felt profoundly sad. Sad that we'd reached this point. Sad that my son's first birthday party had become the venue for his father's public penance. Sad that proof of love now required laboratory documentation and formal apologies delivered to audiences of neighbors and relatives. The applause that followed Jared's speech was polite but subdued, the kind of acknowledgement you give someone who's confessed to something embarrassing rather than someone who's done something admirable. As conversations gradually resumed and the party returned to something resembling normalcy, I found myself standing alone by the dessert table, watching George laugh as my father helped him chase soap bubbles across the grass. "That must have been difficult for you both," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Dr. Martinez, our marriage counselor, whom I'd impulsively invited the week before. "More difficult than I expected," I admitted. "I thought it would feel like closure, but mostly it just feels necessary but insufficient," she suggested gently. That was exactly right. The apology was something that needed to happen, but it couldn't undo months of damage or restore trust that had been systematically eroded. It was a first step, not a final solution. Over the following weeks, the absence of Daisy from our family gatherings became increasingly noticeable, and increasingly welcome. Without her particular brand of toxic commentary, dinners at Robert and Patricia's house were actually pleasant. Conversations focused on normal family topics instead of thinly veiled criticisms and competitive jibes. I'd received one text from her about a month after the party, during what would have been our regular family Sunday dinner. "Hope everyone's doing well. Miss seeing George grow up." I'd stared at that message for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button, considering various responses ranging from diplomatic to devastating. In the end, I'd simply deleted it without responding. Some bridges once burned should be allowed to turn to ash. The truth was, her absence had revealed how much of my family's stress had been centered around managing her jealousy and cruelty. Without that constant undercurrent of competition and criticism, I could actually enjoy spending time with Jared's parents, who turned out to be decent people when they weren't being influenced by their daughter's poison. But the most significant change wasn't in our family dynamics. It was in me. I'd stopped waiting for validation that might never come. Stopped shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never designed to accommodate my full presence. Stopped seeking approval from people whose opinions had proven to be both unreliable and ultimately irrelevant to my happiness. The woman who had desperately wanted Patricia to call her daughter with genuine warmth was gone, replaced by someone who knew that respect mattered more than affection, and that boundaries were more valuable than belonging. George would grow up seeing his mother as someone who fought for herself and for him when it mattered most. He would learn that love without respect was incomplete, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. That envelope hadn't just contained DNA results, it had contained my transformation from a woman who begged for acceptance to one who demanded it be earned. If this story of ultimate vindication had you absolutely hooked, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Olivia calmly handed Jared that envelope at the dinner table, knowing it would destroy his entire world. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories of women who refuse to back down. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.